Welcome to the Pay Love Forward podcast. My name is Dr. Matthew Leavenworth, founder and director of Pay Love Forward. This series shares the stories of Montana's quiet builders of compassion, those who choose to lead with courageous authenticity. At Pay Love Forward, our mission is to build compassionate communities for the at-risk and underserved through mentorship. This podcast is one way we live out that mission. I'm also grateful for our partnership with Resilient Stories, an organization dedicated to amplifying the voices of courage, recovery, and renewal across Montana. Together, we're committed to hearing the story within the story, the deeper narrative of resilience that connects us all. In this episode, I had the honor of sitting down with Penny Ronning, a nationally recognized advocate, speaker, and public policy strategist focused on preventing sexual violence and advancing child protection laws. Penny is the co-founder and president of the Yellowstone Human Trafficking Task Force, Montana's largest anti-trafficking coalition, and brings more than 30 years of experience translating survivor-informed insight into effective policy and public safety solutions. Penny's leadership has been recognized nationally, including twice by the White House and with the FBI Director's Community Leadership Award. But what rose above the accolades was how she carries this work with clarity, steadiness, and a deep respect for the dignity of survivors. We sat down with notes and an outline, and we let them go almost immediately. What followed was nearly 3 hours of story, listening, and honest truth-telling. We talked about voice. We talked about the kind of story that transforms. We talked about how story can heal the divide that keeps fear and hate alive. This episode is dedicated to Penny's mother, Isla Ronning, whose influence echoes quietly throughout this conversation, and to survivors of human trafficking, whose courage and resilience deserves to be met with dignity, care, and hope. The world needs better stories, and Pay Love Forward and Resilient Stories intends to tell them. All right, we're live, Penny, and so thank you so much for sitting down and having this conversation with me. And just to give a little bit of background here, I am a political outsider. You know, it has never been my vision to be involved in politics. I do mentoring and coaching. My nonprofit Pay Love Forward is focused on building compassionate communities. And that's what I've done historically. I've been a mental health counselor and launched this podcast to focus on story. And to me, it's just one of those things that can heal us, can bring us back together. It's something I discovered in counseling, that when I sat with people and really listened to them and heard them, it didn't matter if we were on the same team or voted for the same people. There was something humanizing about listening to people and where they've come from and where they've been. And so I discovered that, and to me, that's something that's been a vision to share that with other people. And so one of the things that I've been focused on is finding people and discovering, especially those people who keep getting back up. And so, you know, one of the podcasts I think of this, you know, this Dr. Don Har, I did a podcast. He's 102 years old, and he's just the most remarkable human being. Dr. Bob Wilmeth is another one who, you know, he was a heart surgeon and then had cancer, and it just wiped his career out. And somehow, in the midst of that, of having those things taken away from him, he was able to come through to the other side and became president of, you know, one of our liberal arts colleges, Rocky Mountain College, and has served so faithfully and so courageously, and has just fought for our city and for our future and for those kids. And so it's such an inspiration to find people that not only lead courageously, but like keep getting back up and keep fighting for what is right and what matters most, and for the world that we've got to hand to our kids. I mean, that's my why. And Penny, you are one of those people. And I truly, I mean, that's one of the special and amazing things about this podcast is I get to sit with my heroes and hear their stories and ask them about why it is they keep getting back up and fighting, even when that is so incredibly difficult. And Penny, and so, you know, I'll kind of record an introduction as well and add it to this, but you've just done so much in our community, you know, multiple podcasts that are just astoundingly high quality, and the stories that you tell and the people that you talk to, you know, it's so powerful. I would say that if people take one thing away from this conversation, just go listen to that podcast, both of your podcasts. And, you know, the one I listened to recently was Juliet Angelo. I mean, it was just such a powerful story. Her voice is so strong. The one with Dr. Yuri Barnea, tell me if I'm saying that right.
It's correct.
Yeah, but just, I mean, you cover incredible subject matter, and it's so important and it's so relevant to people in Montana. And then also your work in human trafficking is, you know, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Matt. First and foremost, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to be part of this journey that you're on and this journey that you are inviting all of us to be part of. That really is the American story. And I know we're going to talk about democracy and where our world is today. But just what you've described really is that American dream. It is what our country was founded on, that resilience is empowering and should be something that we see positively in others, and that we help them step back, that we help them get back up, we help them step up, we help them move on if for some whatever the circumstances is that has gotten them down. The American dream is that you can build up with hard work, you can build up to whatever your dream is and you can achieve your dream. And I
And that's an
think that's
opportunity for anybody, right?
that's an opportunity for anyone. Exactly. That's what America has been based on. I think we're going to get into that conversation. I think we're definitely at the point where we are seeing a federal administration now that is pulling that back and closing those doors, stopping, um, stopping the American value system of these doors in this land are open to anyone who wants to come and work and has a dream and can achieve what they want to achieve. Uh, we're in scary times, but you you mentioned about my work in human trafficking too, and I often say that I should say, I see the worst of humanity, but in that, I also see the best of humanity because I also see those that quietly and with courage come alongside the wounded.
Mm,
And I get a front row seat of watching the wounded
mm. Yes.
rise up and breathe and become to the place of wholeness that they can become and choose to become to, given the tools that they so rightfully need. Um, we've got a long way to go, but we've
Yes.
come so far.
Mhm. Can you talk about some of the legislation that you've worked on,
Mhm.
specifically in human trafficking? A couple of those bills, I've looked into them, and they're just huge progress, especially for the voiceless.
Yeah. I'll start, and I know we're going to get into my story later, but so I'm the daughter of a trafficking survivor. So this has been the whole of my life. I, grew up with a mother who never ever saw justice in her lifetime.
Hmm.
Grew up at a time when victims of sexual violence were really forced by society and forced by the legal system into positions and places of silence. That they were to endure silently. That they were just to live with what was done with them and move on. Uh, for me, watching my mom deal with what she dealt with on a daily basis within her physical body, her emotional sense, her workplace, and what she overcame and what she taught me. But also growing up in the time that I did, watching women fight for the types of equality that uh, that is, I think, would be shocking to young people today if they don't understand history and know history. That simple things for women to get like a credit card in their name. I remember when my mom got her very first credit card, and my mom was a career federal employee. She started her employment as a professional, an adult in the professional workplace when she was 18 years old. She had been recruited by the FBI when she was 17, but she started working in DC for the FBI when she was 18 and had a long federal career. And in that time period, my mom couldn't get a apartment in her name. She couldn't get a credit card in her name. She couldn't have a bank account in her name. She couldn't buy a car in her name. She couldn't do anything of those in her name, even though she was a full-time employee. She was
Wow.
made more money than She earned a higher income than my dad is her second marriage, but she made a higher income than her first marriage. She made a higher income in her second marriage with my dad. And yet she still had to get an uncle or her dad or her husband to even, sign something so she could go pay for a car that they could have, things like that. Um,
But you just talked
what,
about the obstacles,
yeah.
and even coming from a place of some trauma in her past, then to enter in. I mean, that's such a heroic story
Oh,
in so many
phenomenal.
respects.
Phenomenal. And I look at my mom in that way and so many other women in that way. And so when, and I was raised in a home that was very politically engaged and knowledgeable because my mom was a federal employee,
Hmm.
and because her positions within the federal government were those that really were influenced by whatever the policies were going to be that was going to affect the job that my mom had and what she was going to be doing. So I grew up within a politically astute home and knowledgeable home, and my parents always took me to vote with them and at that time, there were voting booths. So I was knowledgeable about that. So when it finally became, when the doors really opened in my life to start looking at what kind of policy I could help change, because it really started with me becoming a CASA advocate here in Billings.
I
A
love
court
this.
of, I do
Hmm.
too, court appointed special advocate for abused and neglected children. The work CASAs do is so profound. And when I became a CASA advocate, well, I had moved back to Billings, Montana to help take care of my mom because my mom had spinal diseases that were actually the direct result of the sexual violence she endured as a child,
Mm.
and then misdiagnosed for years and years and years, because not only did we acknowledge sexual violence of children, we didn't acknowledge it in the legal system. We also didn't acknowledge it in the medical system. So there were never diagnoses. There was never research done on what happens to little tiny bodies when they're sexually abused
Mm.
and things like that.
Well, we
So
know so
yeah,
much more about that too. I mean, my background is psychology and counseling, and just the ways that your body holds on to trauma, that
yes,
those things live inside of you in these really powerful and profound ways, and the effects of just long-term stress and post-traumatic stress disorder
yes,
and cortisol and all of these things that, those things were programmed into your mom, like you're saying,
yes.
from when she was a little girl, and then had consequences that didn't necessarily manifest until later on in life. But we didn't have the language, we didn't have the medical knowledge to understand that.
That's exactly right. And I would say that it was the power of survivor voices that when they talked, when they had the courage to come out of those forced places of silence,
Mm.
when they stopped accepting, shh, boys will be boys, when they stopped accepting that and started to actually give voice to what happened to them, I would say that is when we as a society, in whatever industry, we want to categorize and talk about, but that's when we started to examine, for my mom, where trauma is held,
Mm.
that it's held in that spine,
Mm.
where and the effects it has on the heart, the effects that it has on the different organs, the effects that it has on soft tissue and things like that. It's the power of those survivor voices to speak up when we give them platform. And for me, going back to your question about policy and the different pieces of legislation, it was that when I became that CASA advocate, and my very first case was with this just um, hurting, incredibly hurting 15-year-old girl, uh, who, had a story, but she ended up being trafficked here in Billings. And that was when I learned that what had happened to my mom in the 1940s was happening to children in the community in which I live. And that was stunning and shocking to me.
Mm.
I couldn't believe that we had not evolved as human beings and that this crime was still happening. And that's when I really started to look at why why weren't buyers being arrested, charged, and prosecuted? Why didn't we have federal and state convictions on human trafficking? And to put this into context for people to understand is, even though there may be an act of violence. So, for example, what happened to my mom in the 1940s and so many victims for many, many, many years and generations, there was no language, therefore, there was no crime. There was violence, but violence doesn't become a crime until elected officials put that into writing and give that definition as a crime, pass that legislation, and has to get signed into law. Now we've got a crime. Just because it's an act of violence doesn't mean it's actually a crime.
Mm.
But not only can we have a law, but now we've got to work to make sure it's enforced. Just because a law's in the books doesn't mean it gets enforced either.
Mhm.
And that's part of in a democracy, that we the people have power to say this is what we really want enforced, and what we're paying our public tax dollars for. But for me, it was really understanding that there was no language called human trafficking until the year 2000. That's only 1 year before 9/11. People can remember 9/11, and if they were alive that year in 2001, they remember where they were. Well, human trafficking, that just became a crime in our country 1 year prior.
Mm.
It wasn't a crime before.
Well,
And
Penny,
that's shocking to people.
yeah, and I've heard you just kind of reiterate this emphasis on language and the power of language and what can happen. Because this is just true psychologically, that it's very, very difficult to heal from something you don't understand. And so, if something happens to you, if you like, until you can process it, orient yourself towards it, you can't heal. Your body's just going to hold on to that because it still feels that there could be danger at any moment in time. Like it is, and that is it's a huge component of counseling, that we have to tell our stories. We have to describe what it is that injured us, what it is that we're hurt from, and that's the process that allows us to heal, so we can reorient ourselves in a way that can protect us, especially when something really traumatic has happened. And I've just heard you talking a lot about the gift of language for so many of these survivors, so for so many of these victims, for so many of these people that have had things that they just didn't understand. And especially when society is giving them that feedback, like shh, or even worse than that, that it's your fault, that you're a little
Right,
slut, that you
right,
wanted that somehow.
right. You were
And
out after midnight. You had
yep,
an alcoholic drink. You wore a short skirt.
yep.
Yeah, exactly. All of those things, all of those things. And it has been the norm that we tell our little girls and we teach little girls how to be less vulnerable versus teaching boys, don't be violent.
Mhm.
We teach little girls how to be less vulnerable to boys versus teaching boys how to be respectful to girls. And those are the things that we've just normalized,
Mhm.
and that so many females just have normalized that as well within themselves, and so many little boys normalize that within themselves as well. Um, and yeah, it's so when you talk about policy, there's many different pieces of legislation that we've worked on, and like um, with any type of government where it is a constitutional republic like what we have in the United States, and it's a democracy, and um, that we believe in the rule of law. Those lawmaking evolves. We're
Slow
not,
process. Yeah,
yeah,
intentionally slow.
we're not a dictatorship that commands everyone,
Hmm.
believe the same religion and act in the same way, wear the same clothes, things like that. But we're still evolving, and so laws evolve as well. And one of the things I share when I talk about policy and do public speaking on how to influence culture and how to influence policy and how they they both influence one another and push each other along. Um, one of the things that I always talk about is one of the most regulated industries in the United States is the government.
Hmm.
And so when we're talking law enforcement, um, they have to abide by a certain language of rules. Criminals, they don't. Criminals
Yeah.
don't think that they have to abide by anything. And so they work outside of those boundaries. Law enforcement, although we'll get into ICE later, but we're seeing a group of law enforcement work outside of those boundaries, which is terrifying. But for the most part, our government is the most regulated industry. So we're constantly having to adjust to criminal behavior and write laws as criminal activity, especially what we're seeing in regard to trafficking. It's technology. It's in AI is really the one of the biggest threats that we have happening today. But it's technology, so we're constantly evolving in watching criminal behavior in how they're operating to change our policy and change our laws to be able to address that effectively.
Yeah, you're playing catch up at all times. And even just to
Yes.
go back to kind of something that you mentioned, like you sort of discovered that human trafficking was alive and well, even in our community, which it most certainly is. And I would probably even argue that it's proliferated, that it's probably
Yes.
quite a lot worse than it was even when your mom grew up, and that's because of technology. It's because we are interconnected in all of these ways that give predatory people access, especially to children, in ways that are just unprecedented. And then you're also talking about this process where laws have to catch up with something that's evolving so quickly, right? I mean, technology is evolving so quickly, and just what is even available right now. And I even talk about, I'm 40 years old, but my generation, I think of us as sort of like the experimented on generation. I mean, we were right there when Facebook, rolled out, when pornography became available. And these are global phenomenon that reshaped culture and humanity at levels we've just never seen before and had no capacity to understand. And what that has done to human sexuality, what it's done to um, just the development, healthy development. And now we're just living in this, boy, I mean, it feels a little Orwellian, sometimes right now, especially
It
not
is.
just, yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah, it's not
Um,
just feels it. It is.
it is,
Yeah,
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
We are living it. I would share, Matt, that all of those things have always been there.
Hmm.
So pornography's always been there. The abuse and the violence on other bodies have that's always been there. What I would say has changed with your generation and certainly with young people today is access.
Hmm.
The access has opened up so much more to those things that, just like what you described, empower predators. It's We've stayed ahead in those laws. We I shouldn't say we haven't stayed ahead. We've kept up in our laws. We were keeping up in our laws. And then with your generation and all the generations since, there's been no laws on technology for the most part. There's been no significant policy on online child safety for 25 years.
Mm.
And so when you think about where technology has come and all that it's expanded into, and I think was the iPhone like just 17, 18 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And we look at all of the different versions now and the way technology has just exponentially changed just in that short period of time. Our laws have not kept up.
No.
And that's where I would say um, where where the challenges have come and why we're seeing more types of sexual violence against children.
Hmm.
Um, it's not that the acts of violence aren't increasing. It's the level of violence that's increasing. That violence has always been there because that's a humanity issue. That's not really a technology issue. It's a humanity issue. So trafficking looks the same no matter what culture it's in because it's the crime against a body. And
Mm-hmm.
so that always looks the same. It's the access to that's being provided and given to those predators. Whereas before, they actually had to be seen on a street corner.
Mm-hmm.
Now they can do it hidden, within their cell phones and then, within their computer in their home, whatever it might be. But our laws have not kept up.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's where I come in and where the
Yeah, and that's
groups
where
that
you've been
yeah
working
groups
so
that
hard
I yeah groups
to
that I work
advocate.
with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Penny,
that's where we come in.
what's your proudest piece of, maybe legislation or just advocacy in general that comes to mind?
Wow, I've never been asked that. There's so many things that came to my mind right away, but I think it really comes down to the basics of people are now talking about human trafficking.
Mm,
When I started talking, we started the task force 10 years ago, but I started talking about trafficking even before then, and no one wanted to acknowledge that it was a thing in Montana, that it was
mm,
a thing over there. It was always over there somewhere else. And um, people are now talking about it, and people have awareness, and they're now understanding that it happens in rural communities and in Montana and in our country, just like it happens in third world countries or in
mm,
Europe. Uh, and the other thing I think is giving voice um, to that this in our country is something we need to be addressing. And by this, I mean male violence and giving voice to those two things. Everything else ripples out of that. But that our state is now is now in many ways leading the nation in the work we're doing on human trafficking.
so
Um,
exciting.
you know that I personally have been recognized um, for what we do in Montana. It's because people are now talking about human trafficking. Everything ripples out of that, and I think that's probably the thing I'm most proud about. And that all comes back to just fighting for justice for my mom,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes me proud of my mom.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe let's talk a little bit more about that because just even this, like I want to get to know your mom. Like I just can't even imagine the journey that she was on from that background of abuse, and then at 17 or 18 years old to go to Washington, to be part of the FBI. Like what a proud legacy, what a legacy of resilience. And so maybe just talk a little bit more about her.
Yeah. So my mom was one of 13 children in
Wow.
rural South Dakota. Yeah, not uncommon for rural South Dakota. In the 30s. She was born in 1935, so not uncommon, in that time frame. Uh, I come from, both sides of my family are egg families.
Mm,
And my mom was, one of 13 children. There were only three girls, 10 boys, and she was third youngest. So she had a lot of older brothers and sisters and two younger brothers. Um, and then, you know, one one was violent,
mm,
and he raped his two little sisters almost every morning for my mom. It was from the time between 5 and 9 years old, and uh, and he would sell her to the neighboring farm boys to do whatever they wanted to do sexually to her and to my aunt. It was interesting. this has been the whole of my life. And it was only last year that it really hit me hard, and it became a realization to me. And I think, like so many other families, when you are quieted, because our family lived in that shame, because my mom lived in that shame. So we were quiet
Mhm.
about what my mom had endured and what she lived through. It was only last year that it really dawned on me, and an onion layer, another onion layer opened up,
Mm.
that my grandparents knew, that my grandparents knew everything that was happening, and that my grandparents never fought for their daughters. I think I had just been in denial about that. That hit me really hard, about a year ago. And that was another layer of just deep, wounds that I felt for my mom. My mom loved her parents so much
Mm.
and did so much for her parents, and I loved my grandparents. Um, but it was that another wound that I really felt for my mom. But my mom was never given any medical care. She was certainly, there was no health care, there was no mental health care, there was no emotional health care for anything that my mom or my aunt went through. My aunt, I don't think, ever talked with her family. My mom, did. She talked with us, but I don't think my aunt ever did. I don't think she ever
Just wasn't able to go
talked.
back.
Yeah, I
That's
don't
it.
think that she was. I think she stayed in that silence. I've never talked with my cousins about it, but they know that I talk about my mom, and they've not approached me. So I'm assuming that my aunt never,
So
never talked
even
with her children.
even within the context of your advocacy and how this has become a why for truly, Penny, just the remarkable work that you've done in our community, there's still a culture of silence around that.
Absolutely. I live that, that's why I think I can relate to so many, tribal communities and rural communities, is because my family, I still live that. My family still is very quiet. Not my immediate family, my, the extended family of my cousins and my aunts and uncles. I only have one surviving uncle now, but within my cousins, on that side of my family, it's never, ever discussed or talked about, ever, ever. Um, and and that's still common. That's still common among rural families and tribal families in different cultures. Uh, and I think that's why I can relate um, to to victims that come out of familial trafficking when they're trafficked by a family member. And I'll just say right now, while I said that, one of the things we know in studies that have been done in domestic human trafficking is in the United States of America. What we know through studies is that children under 10 years of age in our country, it is almost 100% that their trafficker was a family member. If a child is under 10 years of age, it is almost 100% a family member that is trafficking that child. And that's the number, under 10 is where we're seeing trafficking grow and grow and grow. And
Mm.
that's because of OnlyFans and Pornhub and a lot of these other Twitter, now X, a lot of these other platforms that allow for accounts for people to upload
Mm.
uh, horrific, horrific child sexual abuse material and get money for it. Um, it's, yeah, and that's why we're watching that number just escalate as much as it is. But my mom, she, when she first got her periods, she would hemorrhage with her periods. And as a young girl, I thought that's what would happen to me too. That when I got my period, I would have to go to the hospital and get transfusions. That's how my mom lived. My mom lived because she got blood transfusions. So I thought that's what I would have to do as well until my mom, until my mom explained to me in this wonderful book, Are You There, God It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. I got to read that book in sixth grade and had those conversations with my mom. And my mom was so wonderful to have those conversations with me that I learned that no, this was damage that had been done to my mom, and that, that most likely wouldn't happen to me. Um, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But uh, the damage that had been done to my mom's little tiny body caused her to lose multiple pregnancies. Um, she was not able to carry me to term, so I was born young, born
Mhm.
a preemie, and my organs were not fully developed. I spent a lot of time, in the hospital, and I know you certainly have that experience as a parent. Uh, um, and what we would learn as I would age is that the damage that had been done to my mom and my mom's inability to have a safe pregnancy with me caused damage to my body. And so my female reproductive organs never really developed in a healthy
Mm.
way. And so I learned in my 30s that because my reproductive organs did not develop in a healthy way inside the womb, that I was never going to be able to have children. And
Mm.
much like my mom, I ended up with horrendous periods throughout my life, as did my sister. Um, and so these are the things that when a child endures sexual violence, these are the things that continue on in generations. We know in DNA it's not just hair color, eye color, and everything else. It's a lot more that comes
Mhm.
through that DNA as well.
Yeah.
But plus the damage that had been done to my mom's body. And then I know you've listened to my TEDx talk, so you know that at 42, my mom had an emergency hysterectomy just to save her life. And the surgeon shared with us that when he was lifting her female organs out of her body, that they fell through his fingers like wet tissue because she had been rotting from the inside. Her body had dealt with so much infection that had gone misdiagnosed as a child and continued to be misdiagnosed as an adult. Um, that it continued in her children, in her pregnancies, and the loss of so many pregnancies. And yeah, her
And
she
that's
did.
just another
Yeah,
layer, Penny. Because I mean, obviously, we know about generational trauma, but you're talking about actual physical. Like this
yes,
is, yeah, like you're like
yeah,
how bodies development. There's physical trauma that is generational, that's passed down, because of what your
yes,
mom experienced.
yeah. Anger, the things that we carry within our emotional systems,
Hmm.
and our mental systems, things like that. All that gets passed on as well. Um, but um, one of the things I was going to share as well is when we talk about trauma, and you would be the expert on this, but that's still a relatively young word.
It is.
It's a young word, and we're still learning about all of the things that really occur with trauma and what trauma does to our beings as well as generations.
Hmm.
So we're still learning that,
Of course.
and we're still learning what how to treat those things and how to identify those things. And um, those are things that victims have lived with. And when I talk about victims of sexual violence and especially victims of trafficking, um, they were often criminalized for.
Hmm.
So we had legal systems that criminalized individuals for the behavior that that were things that they were forced into. We criminalized them for that, and we're still, I think, coming to terms with that as a society and as a nation, and scarily moving backward.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, Penny, there's just so much there to unpack, and I think again, like this, the theme that keeps coming to me is that we have to have language, and I just because I've worked in the field of counseling and have worked with lots and lots of little girls, young women who have experienced the kind of violence that you're talking about, and just even the treatment that we're able to offer now in comparison to just the absolute silence that your mom got as she went on truly what just seems to me like such a courageous journey. And I want to hear a little bit more about that too, because I mean you kind of described what she went through, but then somehow made it out to Washington, became a part of the FBI, brought you into the world, raised you as politically aware, ethically driven. Like there's so much to her story that is also like, but she overcame so much of that on her own. And so I'm very interested in like where you think her level of resilience came from. Like how did she get to the other side of all of that?
I it's that's a great question, and I wish I had all the answers to that. So much about my mom I still, haven't shared with you, but uh, my mom was a phenomenal typist.
Hmm.
She could type 120 words a minute with no errors on those manual typewriters. If this is before your generation, but it was the type of typewriter I grew up learning on. They were black and had these silver keys and this silver handle that you would pull to move the bar back and forth and your paper back and forth. And um, you had to press really hard on those keys. They weren't electric. You had to press really hard on those. And she could type 120 words a minute with no errors. And so when she finally graduated, from her little tiny rural school, um, she went to, and thankfully, my grandparents did support her in doing this at 17 years old. She went to airline school in Omaha, Nebraska, and she was learning how to become a teletypist, so she could work in teletype, and she had planned to do that within the airline industry. But the FBI had discovered a test she had taken and saw what
Hmm.
her results were on that particular test. And so they contacted her and recruited her, but learned that she was only 17.
Mm-hmm.
So she had to wait till she was 18. So by the time she's 18, she gets the letter from the FBI and heads out to Washington, D.C.,
Mm.
where she tests again. And she ends up in this small group of women, young girls, really, young women in their late teens, 20s, uh, who all worked just right across the hall from J. Edgar Hoover. That was my mom's very first boss. That was who she reported to directly. They had no other supervisor. They reported directly to J. Edgar Hoover. And their job was to decode the messages that were coming in from the field agents,
Huh.
and then they were to take that messaging over directly over it. They would decode it, they would retype that out, and then take it directly over to Mr. Hoover. And that was her job,
Wow.
and she loved it. And she lived in an all girls boarding house.
Maybe give some context on who J. Edgar Hoover is.
Oh yeah. So for those that don't know the history of the FBI, so J. Edgar Hoover was probably the most famous and possibly the most notorious of all directors in the FBI, and he was the director I think that has served the longest. Certainly, but he served during a number of through a number of historical events within our country. And there's a lot of things that have been said about Mr. Hoover. My mom always shared that he was incredibly kind
Mm.
and respectful and polite to the group of women that worked in the pool that she was in. She never had a negative word or a bad word to say about him, and she said to that group of women he was always respectful,
Mm.
kind, polite, and professional. And but there's a lot of people who have things to say about who J. Edgar Hoover was because, yeah, he was definitely both that, nefarious, notorious, infamous. He had certainly most likely qualified for all of those in, different parts of his life as well. Those were just not the parts that my mom ever experienced.
Mm.
But anyway, during that time in my mom's life, she was only 19, when she married her first husband. He was not a nice guy. My mom had little experience in making good choices and making good um, decisions about different men that she met. She came from a very rural place, where there were very few boys to date, to now DC as an 18, 19-year-old.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I know you probably can't imagine because you've spent some time in DC, but
yeah,
rural Montana in the 1940s to DC, those are
yeah,
worlds apart.
yeah. And this would have been rural South Dakota. My mom was
Hmm.
raised in South Dakota, but very much worlds apart. Worlds apart. And anyway, she meets this guy from New Jersey and they get married. And he was not a nice man. And her first marriage was abusive. He tried to kill her by strangling her twice. When my sister was born, my sister is from my mom's first marriage. Um, when my mom caught her husband looking into my sister's crib and saying, "I can't wait to get into your panties," that was the night my mom grabbed my sister and fled. And my mom really never looked back. And so this is another one of those times. This would have been the 1950s. So here's my mom now, 19, 20, 21 years old. She has a child. She is divorcing. She is terminating the rights to this man that was the biological father. And this is the 1950s. We put that into perspective of, again, what my mom found the strength to overcome.
Yeah, this
And
is pre-civil rights
yeah,
era. This is, it is a fairly male-dominated world in the
correct.
1950s.
Yes, very much so. And I will share that my mom always said that her bosses in every job that she had within the federal government, her bosses were always male. But she always said that she was so fortunate that every boss she had within the federal government supported her right
Mm.
to move up the ladder
Mm.
and to get promoted and really fought for my mom in every promotion that she got. And one of the things that, again, I'm really proud of my mom, um, and so my mom credits those men that really were her allies within her job. Um, when so my parents end up, she meets my dad. They end up getting married. I was born in South Dakota. We were living in South Dakota. They had planned in 1970 to move to Montana,
Mm.
and so my parents were buying a restaurant that my dad owned and operated. My mom was a career federal employee, and so this was 1970, and my parents were moving to Montana. My mom's boss, who had also moved to Montana, had told my mom to apply for transfer funds. And he said the federal government should pay you for moving because you're transferring from one federal office to the other federal office. And the federal government pays for my move. They should pay for your move as well. So my mom filed those transfer fund papers, and the federal government responded and said, "Oh, no, we don't pay for female employees to move from one office to the next."
Mm.
And so my mom's boss encouraged her to petition that and file a suit against the federal government, which she did. And she petitioned that, and she won. And so the federal government changed the policies for female employees that
Oh, wow.
moved and transferred from one federal office to the next federal office. So then my mom's boss said to her, "Now you need to go apply for transfer funds for your spouse
Mm.
because I applied for transfer funds for my spouse and I got them for my wife. You need to go apply for transfer funds for your husband." So my mom goes and applies for those transfer funds, and the federal government responds and says, "Oh no, we don't pay for transfer funds for a husband. The husband is the head of the household. No, 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 we
Mm.
don't pay for that." So my mom's boss encouraged her to fight that. My mom fought it and she won, and then changed that precedent within the federal government as
The
well.
federal government. So this is affecting,
All
just
female
people, yeah,
employees. Yeah,
females all over the
yeah,
country.
all female employees. Yeah, yeah. And but that was 1970, Matt.
Mhm.
You think about that. That was 1970. That's not all that long ago.
Well,
That women
Penny,
still had to fight for those simple things.
I mean, absolutely. And if you read enough history, if you understand history, how we've gotten to where we've gotten is not an accident. It's been
Correct.
the fortitude and the strength and the courage of all of the people that we benefit from, your mom included. And I don't know if you know this, my wife is a physician at Billings Clinic, and she's our breadwinner. She has put me in the position where whatever advocacy I'm capable of doing is a byproduct of her work, her expertise. I mean, she's the best doctor I know. Like, she's just, I mean, you can get me started on my wife and I'll just
Mhm.
brag all day. She's just a wonderful woman, but sexism, all of these things are so present. I mean, I hear the stories all of the time, like, patients who are like, oh, where's the real doctor?
Yeah.
She walks in and, it's literally just because she's a woman. And if you ever get sick, you better hope you have a doctor as proficient as my wife,
Yeah.
because it is that level of skill that is required to do what she
Yes.
does. But even even my wife in the reality that she exists in is the benefactor of so many people who have now
Yes.
there's more female doctors than male doctors, which we really need doctors as a society.
Yes.
um,
Yes.
and that's a whole nother conversation, but our war on expertise, our war on
Yeah.
knowledge, our war on, we're demeaning the people that know most about the subjects that make our world spin.
Yeah.
That is,
Matt,
that's happening.
yeah, you think about the fight that it for women, and they need male allies. I always say
Hmm.
that.
And I'm loving your
They
story
always
because,
need male
yeah, yeah.
allies. But you think about the women that came, years before your wife, that had to fight to open up those science stores for women in classrooms, in degrees, in all the ways for young female minds to learn, and had to fight to allow space and get space for those young female minds to learn. Just think, Matt, where our health care system would be in regard to breast cancer, ovarian cancer, everything else, if those doors had been, just opened right from the beginning. How different, how different our ability to treat the different types of heart disease and cancers that we see in female bodies, how different that would be.
Mhm. Yeah, but history doesn't work that way. The way
Yeah,
people don't give up
it
power,
doesn't.
right? It,
Nope.
it
Nope.
oftentimes has to be taken at a cost.
That's
And
exactly
and we
right.
are right now talking about the courage of the people that came before us. And of course, Penny, and love to even kind of hear the transition into, because I'm always wondering where people got the courage and passion to lead. And you've just been on the front lines of a, a brutal fight for a long time in many of the domains. I mean, even your campaign, in 2022. But these are hard things that you've done and you've fought for. And so I'm always kind of curious. I mean, I'm hearing about your mom, and it does sound like the apple doesn't fall from the tree, too far from the tree. That her courage lives in you as well. But maybe talk a little bit about your history and where your appetite for leadership came from. Like, how did you become the leader that you are?
Um, I think of, the thing that came to me is the Helen Reddy song, I Am Woman, I am woman, hear me roar. And um, one of the lines in there is about how the lyrics where, the woman, when Helen Reddy is singing this song, that it's wisdom born of pain.
Mm,
That yes, I'm wise, but I paid the price. It's wisdom born of pain.
mm,
And growing up in Montana, I was this creative kid. And I feel very, very, very fortunate that I grew up at a time when, well, there was no daycare. There were no drop-in centers, there weren't anything like that. We didn't have internet, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have anything like that. We had, I think, two channels in Billings, Montana at that time, and you had to get up and, change the channel. And so I grew up during a time when you played outdoors,
Mm,
and there you went to aunt or uncle's house or the neighbor's house, or for me, I went to my dad's restaurant after school, or I went to the federal building, and I got to witness and be a part of a workplace environment the whole of my life, and got to be in those social structures where I witnessed people coming and going and working and everything else. And so I just grew up in the normalcy of what was federal government and the normalcy of service at my dad's restaurant. And I feel very, very, very fortunate to have had those experiences growing up. Um, However, as a creative kid, I would watch I would watch movies on Saturdays, or I'd watch television. I loved, the old television shows. I loved black and white movies. I would watch Gary Cooper movies, and I loved story, just like what you talked about at the beginning. I loved that concept of telling a story in artistic ways. And so when I was a senior in high school, I was meeting with my guidance counselor, and I'm also very blessed to have had two parents who always said I could do whatever I set out to do. If I is in gymnastics, I could go forward in gymnastics. Whatever I felt like I
they
love to
embraced you.
read.
They
Yeah, I
celebrated
love
you.
to
Yeah.
read. Let's get more books with Scholastics. Let's get you to the library. Let's get you to the bookmobile. You like this? Okay, we're gonna, help you have access to that thing. And so when I was a senior in high school and I was meeting with my guidance counselor, he asked me what if I was wanted to go to college and what my college career plans were. And I said, well, I wanted to go to USC Film School.
Mm,
And, this was 1979. I graduated in 1980. This was 1979. He patted my hand because I was had my hands on top of his desk, leaning across, talking to him. And he reached across and patted my hand, and and just said, well, that's a nice dream, but let's talk about what you're going to do for a living.
mm,
I was stunned. No one had ever said anything like that to me, that I couldn't dream
mm,
and potentially make that happen. That just, I just had never been told that. And I went home and I told my parents what he said, and neither of my parents graduated from college. And so we all took that seriously and thought, well, he knows what he's talking about. I should probably go to Montana State University and study something serious, what girls are supposed to study. And so I did. I went to Montana State University and studied psychology and almost flunked out,
mm,
because I was miserable. I was so miserable. And long story short, ended up becoming a flight attendant, and I loved that career. Absolutely loved my career, and I ended up doing that as a fluke. Really lived in Los Angeles, and but my 20s and into my 30s, I lived all over the world and spent my time within a career traveling all over the world, and got to see so many different cultures. And then I would also say that I also traveled with an organization called Up With People, and that really set, in my younger years. When I was 20 years old when I traveled in Up With People. My parents had been hosting Up With People, my family, since early 70s. And Up With People was an international organization that traveled the
mhm,
world, and really worked at building cultures of understanding. And so I got to spend a year in Up With People traveling, and that really opened my eyes to different cultures, and helped me develop leadership skills and set me on that path. And then becoming a flight attendant, where you are a first responder in the sky
Mm,
and traveling all over the world and seeing different cultures in that way as well. Um, that really, I think, just continued to nurture that that love of voice
mm,
and being able to see different cultures throughout the world, from not just an American point of view, but from a more worldly point of view, and seeing how different cultures operated in different ways. Uh, I think also benefited that voice within me as well, and always, felt like even from a child, I didn't like bullies
mm,
and really stood up to bullies. Even if they were adults, I stood up to bullies.
mm.
And it didn't, just never felt that fear was more powerful within me than the need to be a voice. So the voice always felt like it was the more powerful thing in me than the fear paralyzing
Yeah.
me to stand up.
Yeah, yeah, which seems pretty consistent with what I know about you. But I hear a few things. One is that there was a creative presence in you from a very early age. And then also there was something very exploratory about you as well. I mean, I think of being a flight attendant and like there was a phase in your life where you were out there discovering the world. And then I love that you had a sense of justice from a very young age, that
Yeah,
you were willing to fight
absolutely.
for
Yeah,
people who couldn't
yeah,
necessarily fight for themselves.
yeah. Yeah, I do. And I believe that came within my DNA. Plus, I just saw that, I saw it within my parents, and
Mm,
they, my parents taught me that by example. They really did. And they followed through with that in their actions. And so I got to see that in my home. And it was foreign to me when people didn't do that. That was
yeah.
just like, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you stand up and fight for the underserved individual and the underserved person? Plus the fact, part of, I didn't share that part of, after my mom, left the FBI, she went into a couple of other federal agencies, but the bulk of her career was with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And
Mm,
so not only did my mom's voice influence me, but I had such a powerful influence from, from my birth on of Native American families,
mhm.
because those were my mom's coworkers, our friends. That's who my mom worked with. So she would take me when she would work on different reservations. We would go to the different tribal lands, and I would go with my mom. And so I feel, again, honored and blessed to have been influenced at such a young age by those powerful narratives and those voices. And I also got to see at a very young age what the word reservation meant
Yeah, and
and
just
got to see
exposure
it.
to some of the hardships, some of the levels of poverty that they
Yes,
experience,
racism.
and
Yes.
all of those things. But you would have seen that at an early age, been exposed to that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So how did all of this culminate into maybe your vocation, your passions now? I mean, your work in human trafficking, your work in politics, the podcasts. Like how did all of this come together for you, so that you were able to find your voice in fighting for others?
Uh, it really goes back to that CASA case that
Hmm.
I shared at the beginning. When I watched this young girl, one be trafficked here in Yellowstone County out of a fast food place. I mean, she was trafficked for drugs. And I watched her have to deal with this in a very broken system, and the lack of support and the lack of laws that were in place. Uh, on that end, the just for me, the wake up call and the realization was one of those aha moments. Oprah Winfrey used to always say, "What's your aha moment?" And for me, it was one of those aha moments that, wait a second, I thought other people were out there I thought we had laws in place for this. I thought we had other people that were out there putting these bad guys away. And it was that aha moment of, yeah, no, they're not. And no, we don't have laws in place.
Mm,
And so my first approach was to the FBI, and I did ask, what laws are in place and how do you go after the buyer, which is the rapist, but the buyer is the demand in human trafficking, and so we know that demand fuels supply. So
mm,
um, when I asked what's in place with law enforcement to go after the buyer, and was told, oh, nothing, men will always buy sex.
mm,
That triggered in me a oh no response. That nope, that is an unacceptable response. And so I went back to that same agent 4 different times asking that same question. And and he was finally like, I don't think she's gonna go away. And like, yeah, I'm not going away because that answer is so unacceptable that
insufficient.
that answer is just bullshit. That is not okay. And so I finally went to that particular agent. I sent him a message and said, "Would you be willing to meet with me? I have an idea, and I'd like to talk to you about that because this agent, his job was he was the investigator. His Within the FBI, he investigated crimes of human trafficking. That was his sole area of investigation, and online exploitation. And so I met with him, and we sat for 2.5 hours, and I shared my idea that that the buying of bodies
Mm,
is really slavery, and the buying of human beings, buying and selling of human beings is slavery, and this is a community problem and it needs community solutions. That clearly, if law enforcement is telling me that men are always going to buy sex, therefore we're not going to even put any
yeah.
effort toward um, uh, criminalizing a buyer, that when we have bad laws in place, and law enforcement can only enforce the laws that we have in place. So when we've got bad laws in place or we have no laws in place, but we've also got a lot of cultural change to do within law enforcement and within society. And thankfully, we had, he was one of the best law enforcement agency agents I've ever known,
Mm,
and not to mention just an extraordinary human being and very humble and open-minded man to hear me out in my thought process on that, and hear me out and listen to my experience as a CASA advocate and what I was seeing.
mhm.
Um, and
Yeah, he wanted to learn.
he
Yeah.
wanted to learn,
Uh-huh.
and he was open to that. He was
Mm,
open to learning. He was open to changing the way he did his job and influencing that in the federal level. And we had an extraordinary victim specialist also that he worked with. Um, and he became open to that, and it changed. He came on board and said, absolutely. And I'll take this to my superiors. And the superiors said, yes, absolutely. We agree that task force, a community based task force, which the FBI partners with, sounds like a really good idea. Let's start getting the community involved. We need awareness in this, and we need help in this to address this crime, because the crime was so prevalent, but there just wasn't capacity to go after all of the criminal activity, and there certainly wasn't support systems in place for victims if a victim was identified.
mhm.
And then the United States Attorney's Office also came on. My partner, who was a co-founder in the
Yeah, but
task force at
these are
that time.
bridges that you're building, like that
Yeah,
didn't exist before
no,
between law enforcement and the community, and just like this
no,
dialogue needed to happen to move the
yeah.
conversation forward.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it didn't. Our task force is very unique, not only in Montana but in the nation,
Mhm.
and so that's part of what I do as well. Is I help other states build those, just like what you said, build those bridges and understand how those bridges work. and why we're showing success in
Mm,
Montana in the impact that we're having within community.
mm,
And so really from there, and getting the support of the FBI and the United States Attorney's Office, from there we started to then approach businesses and other agencies and organizations within government and within school systems, within
mm,
medical systems, anywhere, and anyone who would open a door to us to learn. uh, that agent and I would go and train and talk about human trafficking. And one of the things that I learned, excuse me, um, because I wasn't, I'm not an educator. I didn't go to school to be an educator. And so I had to learn, ooh, wait, I can't start with teaching community at, 12th grade level. We have to start teaching community way down here at kindergarten level. And I will share that, it was years at that trafficking 101 level,
mhm,
to the point where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to go out and do yet another 101, 101, 101, 101 before we could start getting into the conversation about the buyer and about demand and the different layers of trafficking, because it's such a layered crime. There's so many layers to this particular crime. And we're still, really unpeeling those layers within our state to be able to address it and talk about it in a the fullness that we need to. But we're certainly, 10 years later, we're now more at that.
mm.
We're approaching that. We're going to, almost ready to graduate high school level within our state. In our country, um, yeah, I would say some states are still at that middle school, elementary school level. Federally, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go federally, and
Well, Penny,
but
just
we're
to
getting there.
pause on what you're describing because you're talking about I mean grassroots, like you're knocking on doors. This is just this is you developing relationships, but you're building a network, like a level of connectivity between hospitals and police forces and the FBI and community partners, and then crafting a model that can be shared with other communities to actually to actually do something about this. And that's so
Yeah.
powerful and that's so profound and it's also exciting. But I can only imagine the amount of the quicksand that you had to wade through to get to the other side to build the fabric of that connectivity.
Yeah, I mean it, and it's still in that building phase, but yeah, it's exhausting. And one of the things that we really had to develop was, how do we get different jurisdictions of law enforcement, over egos and over territorialism, and into space and place of being willing to work together in finding a shared language, in understanding that, well, the majority of trafficking victims are female. Now, that is not to say that there are not male victims or trans victims or non-binary victims. There are victims of all gender, but the majority of victims are female by far. 80, 90% of the victims are female. Uh, um, in getting a very dominated male industry of law enforcement outside of the mentality of prostitution as the oldest profession to prostitution as the oldest oppression,
Mm,
and understanding that these crimes are crimes of oppression and violence, that that's an enormous amount of work, and it was an enormous amount of work, and it continues to be an enormous amount of work. I would love to say that, that we've had 100% success rate on that. Not by far. We still have a lot of law enforcement that still, is very old school in vice, that you go arrest the criminal victim because, surely it was her fault that she was raped. Um, Ashley Judd, she says something so profound that is something that we all have to understand, is that a mouth and a vagina and a rectum are not workplaces.
mm,
And that's what male law enforcement needs to understand and fully fully understand and accept
Mm.
is that these are not workplaces, that these are places that are within a human body. And that human deserves the right and has the right to say what happens to those different places in their body or any other place in their body. And so we had to really figure out how to, one, not be threatening to law enforcement so they wouldn't feel threatened that we were trying to tell them how to do their job, but bring them to the table to say, let's talk about this. How do we better improve our laws so that you can better really get the criminal, get the real criminal? Because I'm going to come in here with the assumption that that's what you really want to do, is you really want to get the bad actor, the bad criminal. And so getting and helping communities to understand that not every law enforcement officer is a cop, that there are different jurisdictions of law enforcement, and helping communities to understand what's the correct jurisdiction of law enforcement to call if you see something. Who's the correct jurisdiction of law enforcement that can investigate a case? Helping communities to understand how cases get prosecuted, how to get over the fear of, but what if I call and I'm wrong, or what if I call and I'm afraid to call, and what if all of the things, the fear of why they don't pick up that phone call and make a report, that um, getting people over that fear. It's so much better to make the call and be wrong than it is to not make the call and be right. And getting communities to feel confident in making a call. You would think that we as adults would just naturally want to protect a child, but that is not true.
Mm.
As adults, we tend to isolate and think of, but what if I'm wrong? What if I get rejected? What happens to me? Versus,
Mm.
you know what, you as an adult can handle what happens to you. Your responsibility is to protect that child, and you just witnessed something and you need to make that call.
Mhm.
But that takes you can't just go in and say that. You have to lay out
It's a
platforms.
cultural change
Yes.
that you're looking
Yes.
for, and the amount of
Yeah.
education and also the amount of partners that need to be educated and approached and
Yes.
onboarded in all of these different ways is like you're just talking about an immense amount of work. I know this is your
Yeah.
life work, Penny.
It's huge. It's huge. And when you talk about the medical community, the resistance to us was
Mm.
HIPAA. That initially the resistance we got within the medical communities was that it's HIPAA. We can't do anything about that. HIPAA, HIPAA, HIPAA. We can't report anything. We can't do anything about that. Uh, yes, you can. No, yes, you can. And so we had to work with attorneys from the different hospitals and the different medical providers and bring all of those people into the room and sit around the table and say, okay, let's figure out how we can develop reporting protocols and train on this that doesn't violate HIPAA, that also um, allows providers, nurses, anyone within those medical systems and facilities, that if they suspect a victim of human trafficking, how to report that, what to look for, questions to ask that won't endanger that victim further, things like that. Because most victims would say to you, yes, I've been to the hospital so many different times for different things, and no one ever asked me a question.
Mm.
No one ever asked me how I got that bruise. No one ever asked me why on my chart I'm in a hospital or I'm in, some type of a clinic for, the 14th time on this UTI. You know, no one ever asks. So giving permission to ask what kinds of questions to ask, and then what you do to report. But getting beyond that HIPAA thing where people just, the medical community just wanted to shut us down. HIPAA, HIPAA, HIPAA. Well, no, we can get around that. And thankfully we did.
And Penny, just even watching you describe kind of those symptoms and instances. I mean, I just watched a little bit of emotion come up, and because these are real people you're thinking of. These are
Yes.
real. These are real kids. These are cases that you fought for. These are people. These are our children.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll share with you, even within the medical community, and your wife would probably say this too, that um, there's so much pressure. There's so much pressure to become in the process of becoming a doctor. There's a lot of pressure in the process of becoming a nurse, a physician's assistant, anyone within, the medical community. But when we talked about that doctor status, the amount of pressure and what they go through within their internships and their residencies and the schooling and everything else, I mean, it's almost inhumane.
What
you
is?
know, it's just almost inhumane. And um, when I was training, I was actually training at Billings Clinic, and this was last year, and I was training to the group of residents.
Mm,
And it was one of the most challenging trainings I'd ever done because I'm now training to this group of residents, and I'm teaching them what to look for, what to ask. And this was a group, they never responded. They
mm,
never asked questions. They just sat there in silence.
mm,
And there was no feedback. There was nothing coming back from them. Nothing. And I I got upset with that. And I finally just said, look, I'm a volunteer.
mm,
I'm
mm,
volunteering my time. If this is a waste of my time, tell me.
mm,
If you don't want to be here, guess what? Then I'm going to leave because this is a waste of my time.
mm,
And they were stunned. And I said, I expect you to be part of this conversation.
mm,
Do you not want to learn what I'm telling you? And one of them, an extraordinary female resident, she just sat there and looked and said, we have a president that's a rapist.
mm,
And I said, you're right.
mm,
Totally agree with you. I am 100% understanding what you're saying to me.
mm,
But I also know you're going to meet a child like my mom. You're going to meet the kind of victims in your room, in your emergency room, in your care. I don't care what you go into. It may be you as a physician walking through a grocery store aisle and something catches your attention, and you know in your training what you just saw is not right.
mm, mm,
I still need for you to be the person that's going to help that individual. Then another resident said to me, and it was a male, and he said, we're sitting here quiet and stunned because no one talks to us about the human that we're supposed to be training.
They were in
And
shock.
you're,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and
They were.
you're, and
Mm-hmm.
you're talking to us about humanity. You're
Mm-hmm.
talking to us about seeing this patient, not just the body that is before you, and looking for the symptom and looking for whatever it is and get out because you got to get to the next one and you've got to document this. He said, you're challenging us to look at the humanity on that table.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I think all of us are trying to figure out how, how do we, how do, is this okay? You're challenging us in a way that we're just not used to having challenged in medicine. And that was
There's
an
so
eye
many. I mean, I
opener.
I can always kind of speak for residents, and I work pretty closely with residents, even on resident wellness and some stuff like that. And I'm sure I know the people that you're describing, and the amount of pressure that they're under, and the amount of trauma that they witness. That there is a protective element to that for them, where
Yes.
they almost have to dehumanize just to survive themselves.
Yes.
But also, like, what you're talking about is so much deeper than that, right? Because we're also
Yeah.
first responders, as counselors, as physicians. Like,
Yeah.
we may be the only people that interact with one of those little boys or girls who's going through something horrific. And if we don't say
Correct.
something, then they're just going back into the environment that they came from. And so that's on all of us, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
like, we have to have accountability there.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
wanted to share. So that group, and I got to go back and be with them a
Hmm.
second time and bring two survivors.
Mm.
And they got to hear from the survivors. And I look back now at that particular group as one of the most profound experiences in this journey. It
Wow.
was
Wow.
extraordinary. Yeah,
You watched the light bulb come on.
it
Yeah.
was
Yeah. Hmm.
extraordinary. It was extraordinary for me and extraordinary for them. And it changed the way that I do medical trainings now. And yeah, it was. I'm I loved that group. It was
Mm.
hard. It was one of the most
You had
challenging
to break
experiences.
through.
But
Yes, a level of resistance.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, and Penny, so I want to ask you a couple more questions just in the as far as what we've kind of been talking about. But I also, you've said a number of things, even about, our president. And so we were going to talk about some national politics as well. And so I want to kind of pivot in that direction because I think there's some really important things that we need to address and that we need to talk about. And so, but like a couple of things that come to mind. One is that you've changed how your approach even to physicians, and I just think about physicians as like they have to be so mechanical. They have to look at people as charts and numbers, or honestly, the exposure level for them is so hard. And again, like I'm looking forward to doing this wellness retreat with the residents, because
Mm,
they need some love and care, and they work so hard, and the
yes,
pressure is so high on them, and
yes.
the knowledge that they acquire. I mean, they're just, I have so much respect for, obviously my wife and physicians, but like the way that you broke through to them was by talking about our humanity. And this is a bet that sort of, it's one of the reasons I reached out to you in the first place, and it's one of the reasons that I'm so insistent. I mean, we're an hour and a half into this conversation now, and I'm not going to edit any of it. And the
Mhm.
reason is because I think people are utterly desperate for something authentic. And there's so many levels to that. I think we're desperate for a real story, for something better than a soundbite and just a whole bunch of outrage. And the next thing that you just get all, worked up about and scared about, and the next, and our culture is so programmed for that. And it's not only that I think that, well, it's two levels. One is that I think people are desperate for an authentic story. We're looking for authentic people. We want to know where people came from. We want to know each other as humans, and we're so hungry for it. But the other thing is that I'm also pretty convinced that people want to hear your story, that your
Mm.
story is just a really, really good one. And so this is, I mean, to me, this is such an honor to be here and to hear that and to hear about your mom and to hear about what she went through to bring you into the world. And now we just have one of our fiercest advocates. And so I have a few other questions too, I think, just even to, just to kind of round out that the story component of what we're here talking about. But I also like, I love, even you're in front of residents and they seem tuned out. And then, I mean, I watched your eyes flash when you said that. And this is one of the reasons I reached out to you, Penny. You're so fierce. And I'm raising my daughter. Like, I want a fierce little girl. You should meet my,
Mhm.
she's real fierce.
I have met your daughter.
Yeah,
She's
she's,
amazing. Yeah,
she's real
yeah,
fierce.
yeah,
And
yeah,
a huge component of my motivation is to expose her to strong women. My wife is one
yeah,
of them. You're certainly one
yeah.
of them. And so even in that vein too, just of like women becoming advocates, women, like what advice do you have for our young women, who are growing up in this very, very confusing world, and many of us are carrying trauma, of some form or another. And so what do you have? What do you want to say to our young girls?
I, it's so funny. I feel like I say it so much online. Um, that when and with social media you get the opportunity to say small tidbits at a time and put those small tidbits out there and they grow into a bigger picture and a bigger story, but when you're asked, when you're asked that question and you're in your mind, you're scrambling to say, okay, condense that down, condense it down, condense it down. Um, it goes back, I think, to what I had shared earlier about when you asked me what am I most proud of, and there's all these different things that I'm definitely proud of, but um, it goes back to what is inside of you that is the thing that will open the door to help other people.
Mm,
What's inside of you that is the thing that will open that door to, and maybe it's to help you, but I, from my perspective, what is that thing inside of you that opens that door to help others, that opens that door to um, to benefit other people, that no one else has the power or is opening that door. You know, once that door is opened, there's a lot of different places to go, and there's other people that can come in to help. But you got to get that door open first. That door to help people. You have to find that language. You have to find what it is that begins that journey to betterment. A lot of people will come along in the journey and will help get to the next step and get to the next step and get to the next step. But someone's got to open the door first. And there were a lot of women that came before me that opened doors, for me to have the right to vote, me to um, have the right to have my own bank account and things like that, to get, be in the workplace and demand equal pay, things like that. A lot of women that sacrificed within their lives and within their bodies and things. You had asked me what, and this may be the transition, but you had asked me what gave me voice to move into politics. And I had shared that I'd always been, I'd been raised in a very political home, a political engaging home, knowledgeable home. But it was in, obviously 2016 happened, and 2016 is when Trump was first elected. And I think for many of us females, especially within, my party, the Democratic Party, we really were believing that the United States would see the election of the first female president,
mhm,
and we were believing that. And then when that didn't happen, uh, the realization setting in that America chose this really horrific human being
mm,
over this extraordinarily qualified woman. Whether you liked her or not, she was highly qualified, much more qualified than the male candidate who was her opposition. And that realization for me was a wake up call, so to speak, that while I had been supporting other candidates and I had been a background player in politics to support other people running, my voice, I needed to start upping my game.
mm,
And I grew up in federal government, so that's where I was always most comfortable, was in federal government. Um, and in 2017, I had been asked to run for Billings City Council because there was an opening in the ward in which I live. And by law within Billings, if you run for city council, you can only run for the ward seat in which you live. And there was an opening that, for that election, that seat was going to be opening. And I got a phone call, would you consider running? And, I just very bluntly said, no, I'm not. I really don't know anything about municipal government and not my area of interest. I had, gone to law school and I loved the Constitution, and it just wasn't my area of interest. I wasn't interested in municipal government at that time. And my focus was really what was happening at both the federal and the state level, but mostly the federal level. And so, like most females, you have to keep getting asked and keep getting asked. And it came down to the last day that anyone could file to run for that seat. And I had received multiple phone calls, and I kept saying no. And then it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm thinking to myself, Okay, you said no multiple times. And so what you're saying with that no is you're perfectly okay with this guy just being handed an elected seat and having no opposition. That literally we're just going to give this individual an elected seat and he doesn't have to compete for that seat at all. And I had that internal conversation with myself to say, then how can I say I support democracy if I'm not willing to give people a democratic choice? Not meaning a democratic political choice, but politically a Democrat
But
choice,
just a choice.
but just a choice. Democracy is a choice. And so I had that internal conversation first of all. And I really had my come to Jesus moment with, do I believe in the Constitution or not? And if I do, then I better go follow through on that.
Mm,
Then then I was trying to talk myself out of that. And so I went to the guy's Facebook page and I thought, how bad can he be? Maybe he's a really good guy and it won't be that bad. And I got to I got to a date in 2016 on his Facebook page, and he had posted that he'd made a very derogatory post about Hillary Clinton, and then in that post he said, and women shouldn't be in those positions anyway.
hmm
And I looked at my
That lit
watch.
your fire.
I looked at my watch and said, time to file. And I literally filed. I went down, got it notarized at the bank, and I ran it in. And I got it to the elections office in time. And it
Wow.
literally it was literally like sliding in the door,
Yeah.
like getting in there and filed. And it's funny, someone said to me, what's the worst that happens? You win? And I was like, well, maybe yes. I don't know.
Could be.
Maybe. Um,
Mhm.
and and I ran that campaign. First of all, I'm a huge, huge, huge believer in campaign finance reform, so that's how I run campaigns. I don't take big amounts of money. I don't sit around and when I run a campaign, I don't do what's called call time, which is spending 4 to 5 hours a day calling wealthy people asking for money. I don't do that, and that because I believe so strongly in campaign finance reform that it's about work. That you're a public servant and so you get out there and work. Yes, do you
Mhm.
need money to run campaigns? Yes, of course you do. But this idea that you need millions and millions and millions of dollars or thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, depending upon, the seat that you're running for, is just is part of the problem. Okay,
Mhm.
but anyway, so I ran that campaign um, on how we view children and the safety of children in our community and what I had learned as a CASA advocate and what I saw within the inability for our law enforcement to effectively respond. And I had to, I had to learn as a CASA advocate to turn my anger over what was happening to children
Mm,
into education. And that was a big part of it. And so it was through running and educating the ward in which I was running, educating those voters on the changes we needed to make within local government and city government in order to better protect our citizens, especially children. Um, and that's what I ran on. And I would say that's what I served the whole 4 years on as well, because our city council terms here in Billings are 4 years. And I'm really proud of the work that I did as a city council member, and I am incredibly proud of the fact that uh, for 4 years I never missed a single meeting, not one single meeting ever, not once in 4 years, and I brought home a whole $400 a month for my job. Big pay. I worked about 50 hours a week on average
wow.
and never had a sick day, never took a vacation from a meeting, nothing. I committed myself to that public service and committed myself to that job and got things done and got things passed that I'm very proud of. But I think that's where I really, really began finding my political voice as a female. And I'm going to share a story with you that I needed to learn. And it again was one of those come to Jesus moments again. I'm 6 months in to my position on Billings City Council. And, this is 2018. And so I'm wearing all the messaging t-shirts, me too. And I'm wearing all the t-shirts that message, female empowerment and all this other kind of stuff. And uh I'm down at City Hall one day, and one of my male coworkers on one of my fellow city council members, there were two females. I always say that when Denise Joy and I got elected to city council, we increased the female participation by 100%. There were two of us. And so one of my male fellow council members was in City Hall at the same time. And he very bravely came up to me, and he just very bravely and directly, but kindly, says to me, Penny, have you noticed that your fellow male council members don't talk to you outside of City Hall? And
Mm,
I actually hadn't really noticed that. And I was like, well, what's your point?
mm-hmm,
And he said, well, do you wonder why they don't talk to you? And I said, no, no. Why do I care? And he goes, I think you should care. And he said, they don't talk to you because they're not comfortable around you. And that triggered me. And I
yeah,
very, very directly and harshly said back, I don't give a shit whether they care or not, whether they're comfortable around me. It's not my job to make my fellow male council members feel comfortable. That's not my job.
mm,
And he just looked at me and said, I always saw you as a leader that wanted to accomplish things. How
mm,
much do you think you're going to accomplish if you can't communicate with your fellow council members? Matt, I was so angry. I was so mad at him. I went home that night, and you and I are both Christians. I went home that night and I got on my knees and I prayed. But I was praying, you know,
mm-hmm,
God, show him his ways, and break through in these men's hearts and everything else. And what came flooding into my heart
mm,
was, the problem is you. And I was mad at God. And I'm like, what do you mean the problem's me? And he said,
mm,
I just could hear inside of me, you're so hooked onto the language that you demand others speak, that that you're not going to accomplish your goals. You're not communicating, and communicating needs to be a circle. People need to understand and then give back, and then you give back from there.
mm-hmm,
And I knew the Lord was talking to me about my need to change the way that I communicated with these men on city council.
mm.
And and that was a come to Jesus moment. And I've credited, and I'm going to credit, his name's Mike Yakowicz. I credit Mike Yakowicz for that. And you and
I
I
had
both know
lunch
Mike
with
Yakowicz.
Mike Yakowicz right earlier today.
Did you really? Yeah. But
Yeah,
so yeah, you and I both know Mike, and I credit Mike for that. Mike and I are good friend. We are good, good,
yeah,
good friends. We
mm,
are, we belong to different political parties, but we are good, good, good friends and work together on a lot of things. And he was incredibly generous
mm-hmm,
to teach me that lesson. And he was a teacher in my life that taught me that powerful lesson.
mm,
And from that point forward, I did change. I changed the way I I worked on the initiatives I brought. So for example, I wanted to pass an energy conservation board. And the first time I brought it, it got voted down.
mm-hmm,
I changed it to energy cost savings
mm-hmm,
and approached it in that manner, and changed the way that I communicated the need for this board and the need for our city to be looking at the way we were exercising energy as a city,
mm-hmm,
and how we could reduce what we were, the energy that we were putting out as a city, how we could save money with that. how we could change the way different programs, light bulbs, excuse me, things that we were using in the city, were there things that we could change to bring those costs down to save taxpayers money and then improve and benefit the environment? When I did that, and also the groups the grassroots groups that we were working with on that particular initiative, one of the things I also said to them, because this was also at the time of AOC's Green New Deal,
Mhm.
and there was a lot of pushback on that this energy cost savings was just me being political, bringing in AOC's Green New Deal into Billings City government. And it wasn't that at all. But I went to that grassroots group and said, okay, every time you come to present, there can never be the color green in any slide. That every single slide needs to be red, white, and blue. Point blank. No green. No green. Do not wear green. Do not say the word green. Nothing. And we changed the way we communicated, and then we had one-on-one meetings with the different council members, and I'm so proud to say that initiative passed, and Billings has now gone on to get
Mm.
national recognition as being one of 120 cities nationally leading our country in energy conservation and cost savings. And what we've been able to do through that particular board and the work that we've implemented within our city because of that board, and the work we've been doing has been extraordinary. And it's been a phenomenal cost savings to taxpayers.
Well, and I just love what you're describing, because at some point in time, through this your relationship with Mike, like, you confronted some of the barriers that were maybe keeping you from being able to work with other people to get done
Yes.
what needs to get done. And I think this is a really positive pivot point too, right? Because so I had lunch with Mike, because Mike is one of my mentors today, because I've really been wrestling with a lot of things right now. One is that I never intended to really get involved in politics. And then I interviewed Russ Cleveland, and may wind up being involved in his campaign. We're talking about a potential podcast tour where I kind of go around Montana, and that's going to be a national race, so it's going to get a lot of attention. And so I'm balancing my outrage and my anger and my frustration and my fear, and I'm watching what's happening in Minnesota,
Yeah.
and we're you know deposing leaders of other countries right now and
Yeah.
threatening to take over Greenland and Cuba. And our country is just on this incredibly dangerous course. And I am a historian.
Yes.
And so I'm watching unfold what has unfolded in the past and resulted in some of the worst things in human history. And we're we're on a trajectory right now that just terrifies me. And so I want to go on the war path. I mean, that is at
Yeah.
least one of my impulses, and it's why I reached out to Mike, and I've talked to my dad, and I've talked to even my wife prior to, and I've been preparing quite thoroughly for this podcast, and I've got all of these one-liners, and I've got quotes from Trump about how long he knew Epstein, and I want to fight that stuff. I want to fight that stuff,
Mhm.
but I'm also wrestling with what my role in this process is. And I think it's really consistent with what you're describing when kind of Mike had that intervention with you, which is, well, who am I for one? But then how can I be an ally? How can I be an asset in maybe preventing, our country from, going off this cliff that we seem to want to go off of, but just in healing in general. And I want to get things done. How can I be an asset to Russ? How can I, how can I fight for, at the same time, like watching a woman get murdered in her car by masked paramilitary troops that are being deployed in our streets. Like, this is, also the stakes are getting really high right now. And so, so I don't know what my role is, but even how this conversation has unfolded right now, Penny, is a teaching moment for me. And probably just in that, like, I'm not the guy who's going to go out there and shoot people down with one-liners like that. That isn't my role. I fundamentally believe that there is something so powerful in story, something so healing in story. And I think probably I just
Absolutely.
need to hold that ground. I mean, and just here, like, we were going to start with national politics. Like, that was my intention. I
Yeah.
had, so, and instead we just got pulled into story, which is what I really wanted to know about you anyway. And I think what a lot of people like, that's what my podcast is for. And that's what I think because I mean you have a huge fan base, and we have so many mutual friends too that speak so highly of you. I mean, you were just a hero in our community, Penny, especially for the women who want to fight. You know, I just know so many strong women, and they just look up to you, and they want to know they want to know your story. We're all just desperately searching for how to fight, how to be a
Yeah,
source of healing right now. And I think people are so tired of all the anger
yes,
and the hate and the
I agree.
fear, and we're looking for an antidote to that.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. And one of the things that was so important to me in 2022, um, first of all, I was watching fewer and fewer women,
Mhm.
fewer and fewer females within the Democratic Party stepping up to run. Now, within the Republican Party is doing a better job at getting females to run. The Republican Party has been doing a better job at building community. The Democratic Party has to get better at that. We used to be the party of real community and the party of the people. And the Democratic Party, through different events, which is just a completely different conversation, but has lost that ability, and they've lost that direction of. And I shouldn't say they haven't lost the ability; they absolutely have the ability to do it, but they need to be doing it, and that's building community. They've lost that purpose, I think. Even though the Democratic Party states, or we're the party of the people, that platform is a paper, but it's not coming through within um, groups of people and spaces and cities and rural communities and things like that. That's not coming through. So we have to learn how to build community and build structure and foundation again and support sustainability within our democracy, because the Democratic Party's kind of pulled out of that. And people will push back on that and say, no, but we're the ones fighting against authoritarianism. And I would challenge that by saying, really, how many Democrats, um, how many Democrat spaces on ballots in rural communities just go unfilled,
Mhm.
where there's no Democrats running for office at all?
Mm.
In rural communities, it's that is what's prevalent, is Democrats not running. So we've pulled out of democracy in that way, and we're
Mhm.
just handing those elections over, like what I had said to you before. But in 2022, the thing that was so important to me was I knew that a Democrat, I knew that it was going to be a challenge to win, in the
Mhm.
way once the districting happened and I looked at the boundaries and I went, whoa,
Mm.
the way that the Democrats supported, the Democratic Party supported the districting, was all the eggs were going in the western part of the state, nothing in from the central and eastern part of the
Mhm.
state. But if our female voices are not on that ballot, um, we're not part of that conversation, and we're not showing little girls that female voices deserve to be at that podium and deserve to be on that stage and need to be on that stage and need to be in these conversations that are happening. um, that was also one of the reasons why I ran for Billings City Council as well. When I went back and was thinking about all the reasons why I should win, Mike Yakowicz, while he was serving on City Council, he had invited Stephanie Bacchus and I to come talk about human trafficking, and this is
Mhm.
before I ran. And so I we went and we presented to Billings City Council. And at that time, the one female that served on council, she was absent. And so when we went up to the podium and presented, it was 10 men. And they just looked at us with just these blank faces, all but Mike Yakowicz. All the faces were just blank looking at us.
Mm.
And I remembered sitting back down and going, ooh, that that's got to change.
Mm.
There have to be different faces looking back at us to get this to change.
Mm.
And so in 2022, what was important to me is that young females saw a female on that stage and saw a female answering. And often what the independent candidate would say was, he he would say, and what she said, and what she said, and what she said. It
Mm,
got to the point where I sat there thinking to myself, why are you even running? You know, you keep responding with that answer, what she said. Yeah, what she said.
mm,
And and when I would see a young girl wearing a Penny Ronning for, Congress shirt, um, there's a picture that was taken of these two young girls and they're wearing that t-shirt. And that's my one of my favorite pictures in the
mm,
entire world. It not wasn't about like me personally, it was about female presence and female
mm,
voices. And it goes back to, one of the things that you had made reference to early on. And one of the things I believe so strongly foundationally is diverse voices make better decisions.
mhm.
Diverse
Right.
parties around a table make
Mm,
better decisions than just a unified, if everyone thinks the same thing, someone's not thinking. And those diversity of voices is really what needs to be part of who we are. It's always what we've stated we are as a country, but it's who we need to truly become. And unless
Which in
females are,
authoritarianism is
yeah,
the enemy of that process. Exactly what you're
absolutely,
describing.
yes,
It's this,
exactly,
belief that
yes,
there's one individual that somehow has
yes,
the answer to all of our problems and has,
right,
usually identified our enemy and can articulate, why it is that they've taken our jobs and and then that's the
right,
solution that they propagate as
yes,
they accumulate more and more power and more
yeah.
leverage and
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, and I realize, time factor here, but one of the things you brought up Minneapolis, and there's so much we can say on what is happening in Minneapolis, but I really want Montanans to hear and folks in other red states to hear this very clearly. Is we may be thinking that's happening over there in some other state,
Mhm.
and what's happening in Minneapolis or what was happening in Portland or what was happening in Chicago can feel foreign to us in Montana. And we can feel like we're in this protective bubble because we have a predominantly Republican. Well, first of all, we have all Republicans,
Mhm.
white male, wealthy Republicans representing us in Congress. We have wealthy white males representing us, other than the lieutenant governor, representing us at a state level. Uh, and still in Montana, the predominance of all levels of government is male, and it's predominantly all Republican. So we may think that we're in this bubble from Trump's authoritarianism and his direction of violence that we're seeing
And
happening with
campaign of
us.
terror like that is, let's be
Yes,
very clear, that is what this
yes.
is about. It is not about
It
fraud. It
No,
is not
no,
about
it's
it
not
is
about immigration. It's not about anything like that.
it
It's
is about
about a campaign,
terrorizing
terror and
Minnesota
intimidation.
to
Yes,
tear it down
yes.
because of of political vengeance.
Yes, it, authoritarianism and vengeance, yes, but authoritarianism, and he's sending a message to all the other states, because what I want Montanans to hear and what I want rural states to hear very clearly is that this threat and the message he's sending is to all of us. It's to everyone, but he's making an example of these places first. So it's sounding like it is about political attack and political vengeance, and it is all of those things because that's who he is. But there are other things that we need to be watching. So, what is happening in other areas within Trump world is an intimidation and a threat to take BEAD funding. BEAD funding is Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program that puts in funding that gives federal funding to mostly rural areas and rural communities in our country where broadband has been lacking.
Mm,
And so there's massive amounts of federal money going into these areas, and it's predominantly red states. Montana was one of those states that got that first big pot of money.
mm,
Okay, now this is what's important. So Trump and his family are investing heavily in AI, cryptocurrency, everything else.
mhm,
He's got this messaging out there right now that the United States is going to become dominant in AI, and we are going to rule AI weaponry, and we're going to dominate the world over our work in AI. Montana is one of those states that has passed regulation on AI. These were some of the bills that we supported in this particular legislative, or I should say, last year's legislative session. So Montana is one of those states that has passed state regulation of AI. Trump is wanting all states to null and void
Mm.
all of our state regulations regulating AI and the protection of children and all of the other things that we've said AI um, that we've talked about. You and I have already talked about that technology and where that technology is going, the deep fakes, everything else. So Trump wants a 10-year moratorium on all state regulations, meaning every single state that has passed a bill protecting its citizens and children against the harms of AI, that those laws have to go away for 10 years, that there can be absolutely no protections, and AI companies are allowed to just innovate and do everything they want to do without any oversight, any accountability, and all immunity.
Mm.
Well, the amount of money in child sexual abuse materials in the billions and billions and billions of dollars. This is where the most amount of money is being made in the tech industry at this point. Okay. So Trump has been fighting for this 10-year moratorium to pass. Groups like ours, we've partnered in with other organizations at the national level. There's about 40 different organizations we work together. We've managed to kill that in the US Senate. We managed to kill that in the House. And now it's coming back as an executive order. And now he's pushing it in
Mm-hmm.
other ways internationally.
Mm-hmm.
So the threat now is and has been if red states who have passed these state laws, if our governors do not veto all of those laws that we've passed and say, no, these laws are off our books, if our governors do not do that, the federal government is going to come in and claw back all of that BEAD money. Well, our governor, who's heavily invested in technology, and we've already put those funds into process and into progress, and we're already developing broadband equity in our rural areas. That money's we're not going to be able to pay that back as
It's
Montanans
not
and give
available.
that back. So Trump is
We're just being
actually
held
what
hostage. Yeah.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so he is now threatening in greater ways
Mm.
if states do not, if we do not end our state right of independence
Mm-hmm.
to have state laws, that he's threatening what's called preemption, and that he will come in and null and void every single state law and make this a federal law. And he's showing us what he'll do. And he's using Minneapolis, Portland, Chicago, New York. He's using these communities
Yeah, he's not just
as
going to pull your funding. He's going to send in ICE. He's going to send in
that's
like
exactly right. That's
just as
exactly right.
a mechanism of intimidation to
Yes.
just obliterate our democratic processes.
Yes. We've seen that with how he's treated Marco Rubio. We've seen that with how he's treated Ted Cruz. We've seen that how he treats and how he intimidates the Republicans within, it's no longer even it's no longer a conservative Republican
But
Party.
and Penny,
He,
I've just
yeah,
been so disgusted too. Like, I mean, I'm watching clips from Senator Daines and from, our representatives, and they just, when he says jump, they just say how high. Like it is, like, and I know they're worried right now about, like they're working on a bill about keeping, gender equality in sports. Meanwhile, our cities and states are being attacked, and I'm just like watching these clips come, like these are just yes men as far as I can tell, and you're welcome to push back on this, but I've just seen no meaningful like stopgap on just this absolute blast of Like they're just going to do whatever they want, and nobody's going to get in their way. And the second anybody stands up, like it's just one form of intimidation after another. And I've not seen any of certainly our politicians having the spine to be able to stand up to that or say no. And I'm just so worried about that.
Yeah. I um so you know that I work very closely with Senator Daines' office and have for many years. And because that's who Montanans have given me to work with. You know, same with I have to work with the Trump White House, and you know that I've gone to the Trump White House twice. I've been invited twice. I've gone that because I believe that we've had fair and free elections. These are the people that have been elected into office. I want to pass laws. That's who I have to work with. I'm not going to just sit back and say, well, all these kids that are being harmed, they're just going to have to wait until my guy gets into office. I'm not going to do that. I'm
Oh,
going to
you got to
fight
work.
to I'm going to fight to get laws into place. So I work very closely with Senator Daines' office, and I'm getting to know Senator Sheehy's staff, and I'm getting to know Congressman Downing's staff. Zinke's staff pretty much is a closed door. They just don't want to work with us at all. Now, I will say I have an outstanding relationship with Senator Daines' office. I will tell you that they are the best in the business.
Mm.
These people are they they are good people, and they take phone calls, they sit down, they will, you know, every time I go out to DC, I get a conversation and get to sit down. They come out to the hall because a lot of those meetings are done out in the hallways. They come out into the hallway, they take my phone call, they respond to my emails, they're ready and they're receptive and they're fast. And they will work with us. They don't care that I am a Democrat. They work with me, they call me. Um, I have had very, very good relationships with them on every area in which I've worked, on every issue, not just trafficking. They have taken my phone call, and I've worked hard to develop those relationships. Now,
Yeah, I
yeah,
wonder,
go ahead.
do you think that we have anything right now as far as federal representation that's going to be a bulwark against the incursion of authoritarianism that we're seeing right now?
So here's what I would encourage everyone to remember is what you're seeing. Remember, you're seeing clips.
Hmm.
You are seeing clips. You're seeing very purposeful clips.
Hmm.
When I am in DC, now there's a lot of things I can say that frustrate me about DC that
Of course,
really
of course.
just frustrate the heck out of me. I can say that about local city council. I can say that about state government. State government is by far worse. Oh, it's by far worse. The egos in state government are by far worse than at the federal level. But what I see in DC, and I'm, you know, is there 3 times last year and spend a lot of my days on the phone in correspondence with DC um, and staff members of all different offices. I have worked very closely with Senator Cruz's office. I've worked very closely with Lindsey Graham's office and their staff members and his staff members. Um, the staff members are all friends there, and they're working together on different bills. These members of Congress are working together in different areas.
Mm.
So, what we see in clips that are very purposely put out there for clickbait and everything else, I see things differently when I'm in DC. I do see individuals working together. I do see members of Congress working together on different things. Now, that said, I have also been there when I have watched Trump and his groupies, his followers, those in his administration, come into Congress, into the Capitol, and go meet. There is a massive amount of intimidation that is happening in the in congressional Republican offices now. Massive amounts. So, what I want to encourage my fellow Democrats and independents and fellow Montanans is one, remember that whatever your political stance is, and we can entrench ourselves hard into our language, we can entrench
Mm.
ourselves hard into our politics. But we ourselves need to look at that individual and say, that's a human being.
Mm,
What kind of intimidation are they experiencing?
mm,
What may I not know? Is this person so, like I see some of the most horrendous things written about Senator Daines that
mm,
I know are not true, and that I know are not true. And that breaks my heart that as Democrats, that so many Democrats have also become so entrenched in hate that they just immediately say, well, this is who they are. Well, yeah, not really. I'm getting a lot more success with Republicans fighting online child protections and and anti-human trafficking than
mm.
I'm getting Democrats. It's really hard to get a Democrat to co-sponsor a
Gosh,
bill.
Penny, I just appreciate so deeply what you're describing, which is that the picture is just rarely ever what it seems on the surface. And
Yes.
I am absolutely willing to still call out Senator Daines
Yes, me too.
when he
I do
publishes a
also.
clip after
Yes.
we invade another country
Yes.
and take out their leader without
Yes.
any congressional authority, and he applauds that. Like I'm
Yes.
still going to call that
I
out,
agree. I
and
agree.
and
And I agree
and was
100%.
horrified by
Yeah.
that particular post. But
Yeah.
also, what you're
Yeah.
saying is that the like what people are going like their stories are more complicated than
Yes.
anything that we're aware of, which is just back to
Yes.
this idea that we're
Yes.
circling, and especially the idea that I'm hoping to take forward, which is that boy, we're hungry for something authentic,
Yes.
and and
Yeah.
and it's a lot more complicated than we think it is.
It absolutely is. And this is where I want, and you see my posts, and this is where I want people to understand too, that there is also we the people. One of the things you said early on, you made this comment, you said, "Who am I?" And what immediately came to my mind was, you're an American citizen. You're the most powerful person in the world
Mm,
because you have voice. Because in our country, our Constitution gives you voice. When you exercise that voice, bam, that power level increases for everyone else within our country. But so few of us use that voice. So few of us actually collaborate to use that voice, tell that story, everything else. Get to know, like Mike Yakowicz, where are you breaking down that communication and how can that communication change? Um, One of the things that we, the people, allowed to happen, and we, the people, need to start taking responsibility for, and not saying it's just them in DC, it's just them in Helena, it's just them, name the capital, name whatever, that we, the people, need to start taking responsibility because we put this in office and we've allowed this to happen within our country. So we, the people, need to start taking
we
responsibility
do,
for that.
and
What
we better do it quick, Penny.
And we better do it quick. What we have allowed to happen in our country is we have allowed the idea of public service to vanish from elected office. We have exchanged that for convenience. Don't ask me to get involved and use my voice. And because I'm not comfortable with that, I'm tired. I'm over here doing 10 million other things because my kid is involved in 14,000 activities and I've got to pay my bills and everything else. I'm too tired to use my voice over we the people. So, you elected person, it's just your responsibility. You go do that.
Mm,
So we've given up our we the people, and we've given up that idea of public service, and we've moved that into be a ruler because I need just my convenience. So go do whatever you're going to do. I'm not going to participate.
mm,
And we, the people, need to understand that when these people get elected into office, there is this sense of power and this building of power around that person that we've allowed to happen because we've pulled away this accountability of public service because we aren't participating to the degree that we should be participating as we the people. We've pulled that away, and now we've got this power structure of I need to get that individual to do what I need to do to vote, and they're holding out the power. Therefore, I'm going to go in as a person talking about this bill with Oh my God, you are the ruler of the world and you are amazing and you are all of these things. And if I dare criticize you, you're not going to vote for my bill.
Mm.
And if I dare criticize you or if I dare criticize this party, then I'm going to be the bad person. We've taken away our we the people power in our voice and our accountability and our expectation of public servants. So what I want you as the healthcare professional that you are, and when you look at a Steve Daines or a Tim Sheehy, and trust me, I have to I have this has become something I have had to deeply exercise and build that muscle into, is I have to remember one, these are human beings. These are not gods. They have no superpowers. These are human beings. These are human beings that have become so entrenched in this world of power that what if they lose that position? Then who are they in this world?
Mm.
Who are they if they lose that position? Who are they if Trump comes after them? What will happen if Trump comes after them? What humiliation will they face? Because these Republicans have seen the humiliation that happened to Marco Rubio. These Republicans have seen the humiliation that has happened when Trump goes after one of their own. He's
Penny,
they've
I mean,
seen it.
I can honor that. It also sounds a little bit like cowardice to me.
Oh my God, no. Um, no, not at all. Uh, these these positions of power, even at the city council level and everything else, understanding what that is to be there. No, a it is a position so unlike anything I can describe. And um, it is not. Trust me, it is not. I would say to you, it is it is more Christian than anything. And I'm talking about what I'm describing to you and how to see them is to say, okay, you know, yeah, and I hold them you see my posts, I hold them
Oh, I know
accountable
you
too.
do.
I hold them accountable too. I do not, there's not a thing about Trump I like, not a thing. And I'm very vocal. How I have been invited twice to the White House is surprising to me because I am very vocal
Mm.
about my opposition to Trump. I'm very vocal. I spend a lot of time in Senator Daines's office, and they know exactly what I oppose, and they hear it as well because I have those conversations with them. And I'm very grateful that I have worked on those relationships to have those conversations with them and to sit down and have those hard conversations. But this, I think, would go back to, and I would encourage you. Yes, we need to hold them accountable. We absolutely need to fight back in ways that are effective. And we need to do it fast, and we need to do it strong, and we need to do it coordinated, and we need to be strong in what we're doing. We do need to be. Nothing that I'm saying it takes is weak. Trust me, it is not weak. And it's
No,
not.
no, that is
Yeah.
not what I was
Yeah.
describing as cowardice. My description of that is a being so dependent on your position of power that you're unwilling to stand up for what's right, or being so afraid of the blowback you're going to get from a president who is taking us in a devastating direction that you're
Yeah.
unwilling to stand up against that. But
Yeah. No,
I mean that
and
is just
I
my position. But Penny,
yeah. Yeah.
I
Go
want to
ahead.
ask you a question,
Yeah.
which is that I would never wanted to go into politics, never, like but Russ really had an enormous impact on me when I talked to him. It almost like restored hope, and also now I think that the crisis of the time is asking something more of all of us. And I think it's
Yes.
asking something more of our Republicans on the other side. I think
Yes.
it's just asking
Yes.
more of all of us right now. And so I'm trying to figure out what it's asking of me as a mental health practitioner. And I'm even developing this platform, and people keep saying yes, that they're willing to talk to me. And I'm like, oh, really? Benny?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. This
Yeah.
is amazing. And maybe I'm going to go on this tour with with Russ. And I'm just like, and maybe my platform is going to grow, and so that I might have the capacity to have an impact on where our country is headed. Maybe not. Maybe the worst case scenario here is I just tell some people stories and really listen to people and hopefully care about them effectively. But let's say that maybe I am headed in this direction. What is your advice for me or for anybody else who is trying to take a stand, who is so horrified by what we're seeing right now, and feels a responsibility to my children, to our country, to the last vestiges of democracy. I mean, I just feel this stuff, and I don't totally know what to do, and so that question is just for me as I wrestle with this and my next steps.
Mhm. So first of all, have you ever been to the United States Holocaust Museum?
No, but I have
Um,
read so much about.
yeah. Have you been to any of the Smithsonian museums?
Been to a lot of museums.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I was a child. Yeah.
So one of the things that, two of my favorite museums, the United States Holocaust Museum and Smithsonian's National African American Museum on History and Culture. Uh, and one of the things that when you walk that hits you so powerfully when you walk into these museums is is the stories that are being told in the history. And we all know the story of Anne Frank. Um, they captured the story of history. Matt, what you're doing is so critically important. If and I believe, obviously that your passion is to get your podcast out there and to get these stories out there. But in the grand scheme of things, what you're doing is you're collecting stories for history, and you're collecting stories that tell future generations what
Mm,
we did to fight authoritarianism, what we did to fight fascism, what we did to stand for children, what we did to stand for our constitutional republic, our constitution, what we did for healthcare, what we did to better and improve the world. You are capturing those stories for history. When we walk into these museums that are so significant, and this is the threat Trump is feeling now and the demand he's putting on the Smithsonian in changing the stories that they tell and the whitewashing of history, you can't, you're capturing these stories for all history that shows what we did, that shows how we fought this so other people know how to fight it and what
mm,
rights they had because people fought it. That's what those, that's what this storytelling means. At the time that Martin Luther King Jr. was telling stories, and at the time that Gloria Steinem and other women were telling their stories and raising their arms, and the champions for the LGBTQ community when they're fighting to just have their lives and not be killed, you know women just wanting the right to be looked at as a human being in the equality to vote and the things that they had to go through at the time that that was happening. Matt, they weren't thinking that they were telling a story. They were fighting for something in that point in time. And it's now when we go into those museums that we see those stories because they've been collected. And now we can look back and go, I know who Alice Paul is
mm,
because someone collected her story. I know who I know who Emmett Tellis is. I know who all of these individuals are because brave people collected their stories and held on to their stories and their stories got presented. But at the time, they
They're
didn't think they were
fighting.
telling stories, but you're collecting our stories. You're
Mm,
collecting the reason Russ and his wife is his wife and Katie.
Kate, yeah, Kate.
Yeah. So okay. I have not met either of them, but you're collecting the story of why they're in this fight because of what they experienced as a family and how they're championing their daughter and making sure their daughter's life is of purpose that they can improve the lives of other children, that they can fight for health care as we are facing. one of the most demonic individuals within the healthcare system today. And, I would say demonic individuals in the White House. Uh, um, you're collecting the story for future generations that we can learn and we can empower one another. But it is through that story. I've talked to you before about my friend Valerie Kaur, Kaur, for people that are listening. Her foundational belief as a Sikh woman is that story is power. And this is where I would go back and share with you, um, why I encourage you to take your stand that you've got against what Senator Daines and Senator Sheehy and Congressman Downing and Zinke and what you see them putting out there, but also embrace the idea that what Valerie puts out there is, we see no stranger. That what is in you is, what may make me uncomfortable in you and what I don't like in you is maybe what's in me that I haven't yet discovered. And again, going back to that lesson I had to learn with Mike Yakowicz, you know, and the question that I put out on a continuous basis is, America, where we're at now in the age that we're 250 years old. That is baby age in regard to, world civilizations. We're still in such a young age, and we are having to this is our time to define who we are as a moral people.
Mm.
And that's who we are. And so, Matt, my encouragement to you would be, who are you as a moral person? As a moral person, yes, I can hate what they stand for, and I do. I don't like that authoritarianism. I don't like those clips. I don't like what they're saying there. But as a moral person, do I choose to hate them? As a moral person, am I going to say, no, I want to find out in them what I can find common ground in and say, we need to be in this fight together. And if you're being intimidated, let me know if you're being intimidated, because I think there's something in you that there's still humanity in you. And I'm going to find that humanity in you to fight this guy that has no humanity. And I'm here to tell you that there is humanity in Steve Daines, that there is humanity in Troy Downing, that there is humanity in Tim Sheehy. Zinke, I don't know. His office just won't even communicate with us at all.
Yeah, and I hear that.
There's nothing
Don't
that
meet
comes
with
from
constituents, and
there's
they're just
nothing that comes from his office as well. But I will tell you from
because
those
some of
other
these people
offices.
are sociopaths that we're talking about. RFK Jr., Donald Trump is a
Absolutely. Yes.
diagnosable. I have a
Yeah.
doctorate
Yeah.
in clinical psychology
Yes.
and counseling, and these are diagnosable
Yes.
sociopaths and
Yes.
narcissists.
Yes.
And,
Absolutely.
and
I
so,
will
so
share you. I
we do
have.
have to some degree isolate some of
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes. 100% in those individuals. I'm just telling you, in my experience,
Mm.
I have not had that same experience. I have found humanity in Steve Daines. I have exchanged, and I have seen that humanity in Troy Downing.
Well, Mike
And,
Yakowicz is one of my
and
best friends. I mean,
yes,
he's
yes,
just a
yes,
mentor, a father, I mean, I just
yes.
cannot speak highly enough
And
of
he
him.
is a diehard Republican,
Oh, yes.
and I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. And that's the strength that is, Matt, where you and I as Christians, where we really need to define who we are as Christians, is, do we walk this path with Christ in where we bring Christ with us in the worst of the worst? Do we bring Christ with us? And you and I have talked about, going into the fire, and Daniel walking into the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Do we go into that fire with Christ, believing that Christ is with us, and we're going to walk into that fire, and we're going to walk in there with love, because I'm going to believe. And and that is how I've walked into the White House.
Mm.
And but also I believe that that's the people's house, and I was going to make sure my feet were in that house. You know, that when I get an invitation, I'm going to make sure my feet are in that house, and I'm going to put my feet in that house, and I'm going to pray when I get into that house, and I'm going to put seeds of prayer into that house because I'm going to believe that those seeds of prayer are going to rise up, and I'm an American and I deserve to have my feet in that house. And I've gone in there with that intention. Other people have chosen not to go for whatever reasons they've chosen not to go, and I respect that. I kind of fire of I'm going to go put my feet in there, and I'm going to take, you know, these prayer seeds that I'm going in there, and I'm going to put my feet in there, and I'm going to take pictures of things that I'm going to take pictures of, and blah blah blah. Um, but as a Christian, you know, that's really where it really comes down to, um, is our faith for the good times, or is our faith really, you know, this is the fire, and is the fire about who we can who we can push down, or is the fire about what's the greatest thing I can do to improve everyone's life? And the reality is, Matt, these are the people that Americans have put into office. And we have to look at ourselves and say, whoa, is my biggest fight with Steve Daines? And yes, we need to be making those phone calls, and yes, we need to be having our voices heard. But is the biggest fight with Steve Daines, or is the biggest fight with people right here in our community who are supporting Trump?
Mm.
How do we influence our community to not vote like that again? You know, because the power's in that vote,
It
and we've
probably
got,
does have a lot to do with humanizing them and listening to them and figuring out a way to get off of this ledge. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and you know, I am one of the, and it probably sounds like I've been saying listening, listen, listen, listen. But I am one that says, no, I don't have to listen to that, you know, right wing crap anymore. But I need to find a way to figure out how to communicate better my messaging. You know, I mean, I don't put up with the hardcore Trumper anymore. You know, that I don't. But there's a lot of moderate Republicans that are out there. And I think there's more moderate Republicans that are out there that are afraid for our country than what they feel they they can safely say. You know, even within the Democratic Party, you cannot, it's taken me a lot of courage to say the things I've said about the Democratic Party, because even within the Democratic Party, if you criticize the Democratic Party, you are ostracized. You are, you know, called someone who's betrayed the party. Even within the Democratic Party, that
Well,
happens.
and I mean, I took that to heart when you described that when you were on the campaign trail, the Republican Party, those communities were wonderful to you.
Yeah, the
The people that,
Republicans were very nice to me. They were, the Republicans were, they were very kind to me. They were respectful to me. They were professional. They were not mean-spirited. It was the Buchanan Democrats that were horrendous. You know, it was the Democrats within the state party. Yeah, it was the Buchanan Democrats that were incredibly mean-spirited. And you know, there were a number of them that wouldn't even say my name. I mean, wouldn't even acknowledge me as a human being. uh yeah, it was, it was definitely more the Democrats that were awful during that period of time than it was the Republicans.
well, Penny, so I have one final question for you. But
Mhm.
before I ask my final question, I just want to kind of give you some space to, we've talked about so many things, your mom's legacy, your career, your why, how you got to where you are, national politics. Maybe just take a little bit of space, and what would you like to say to end this conversation?
So I think one of the most important things is bringing it back to, who we are as a moral people. You know, really, as a moral society, uh, who are we? As a moral society, how are we interacting with others within our community? You know, you having lunch with Mike, um, how are we interacting with those that may be of a different brand of politics than us? How are we interacting with them? Uh, that how are we viewing what is happening to children, what is happening to the rule of law? How are we viewing that, and how are we challenging others in that? Are we challenging others in just a mean-spirited, I'm going to go out and attack you, and get into the boxing ring and box it out, but brutally box it out to the death? Are we that kind of a people that we're just going to be so mean-spirited and attacked? And I got those my 2 cents, I got my digs in, and for about 5 seconds, I can feel good about that. Um, the reality is that's really not going to get us anywhere, is that has not been working. And we do have to find ways to make our voices heard and create safe spaces for other people to feel safe to communicate, to rise up, to have voice. And we do need to be courageous in what we're doing in regard to our country. We need to find our voices in a more powerful way, and we need to find them within our own communities. We need to put pressure on all forms of government to be working together. I think what we're going to be seeing within ICE, and we're seeing it in those communities like Minneapolis and Portland, and we're seeing it significantly in Minneapolis, and we need to start being prepared in every one of our communities and understanding that levels of government um, are are going to be threatened by ICE. They're doing it now in Minneapolis. Trump is doing that to Governor Walz. He's done that before in other states. He's going to come into every state in the country. He's going to do that. He's doing it to us through the BEAD funding in Montana. He's going to be doing that. So how are we in our communities going to respond to our city councils, to our state legislators, to our governors, our attorney generals, our own Billings Police Department or the municipal department or sheriff's department? How are we going to respond to them? How are we going to influence them to be good government and to also rise up and to say, when the time comes, you need to rise up, Billings Police Department. You need to rise up, City Council. You need to rise up, Governor Gianforte and Attorney General Knudsen. How, are we going to empower them in ways to rise up? And some of that empowerment is holding them accountable, but also giving them um, knowing that this is our state and we're expecting them to do that. But if we go in and just do it constantly with a baseball bat, is that how you would respond? I don't respond to that.
No.
No one responds to that, in that way. And it's like what Governor Walz is saying right now to Minnesotans: don't give Trump what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
Don't give him what he wants. Matt, keep calling Senator Daines. Be nice to his staff.
Mm-hmm.
Do be nice. His staff, they have no positions of power in the sense of those decision making or anything else. Um, uh, but keep calling, be persistent, keep knocking on those doors. Don't go away. But if you're doing that with a baseball bat, no one does. You can be firm, you can be persistent, be active in your language, but we have to do this with effectiveness, intelligence, um,
And the
and
stakes are pretty
decide,
high.
decide who we are as a moral people. But if it comes time that, I'll defend your home, we'll defend our countries together. But is diplomacy, have we lost all diplomacy altogether? I hope not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. Thank you so much, Penny. I do, and I mean, this is, gosh, my daughter, to me, she's just everything in the entire world, and just want to equip her because she's so smart and so talented, and she's 6, right? And so this is my final question for you. Um, Speaking directly to her. So two questions. What do you want to say to my daughter, Huxley, who has the capacity to be, one of those people who really can stand up and make a change? And then what would you want to say to your mom as well, speaking to her?
First, to your daughter, is the powers in her. She was born to be great. She was created to be great. She is equal to everyone else. And use that. Use that voice. Use that greatness that is within her. And rise up with that. Challenges are going to come. No two ways around it, because that's what life is. That's what life is. And those dark times can either empower us through the lessons we choose to learn as we journey through them, or they can defeat us. And the most important thing is to to journey through those dark times, building yourself up, learning, growing, finding that voice inside of you. For me as a Christian, that is my faith in Jesus Christ, and strengthening that personal area of my life to know that I am created in with just as much power and deserving of just as much in this world as you are as a white male, and that I have to fight for that for others as well. But that voice is inside of her. It's like, the musical Starlight Express. You know, the power is within you. It is within you. And you have to embrace that and constantly challenge it and grow it and nourish it. Um, and don't let anyone else, put you in a box and put you on a shelf.
Mm.
Uh, um, for my mom, for my mom, that her voice is being heard, that her cries as a 5-year old girl, they're getting justice. Her cries as a 7-year old girl are being heard. They've been heard by 65,000 plus people that I've personally trained. They're being heard. Her cries are being heard across the world, and her cries are bringing justice to others. And um, that's what I want to say to her. And thank you,
Thank,
Matt.
thank you so much for your time, for your courage, for I think all of us are gonna have to walk into the fire if
Yes.
and I'm proud to walk into it with you.
Yeah. Right back at you. Me too. And I'm a firm believer that's the work that you're doing in Pay Love Forward. Um, that's what's going to change things, Matt. That's there's so much power and so much strength in that. And that is what is really going to change in our communities. And that's where we have to change things in our country. We're responsible for who we are as a community and what we stand for as a community. We're responsible for that. And all of our communities are a patchwork quilt of our country. But we're responsible for right here. And what we're doing within our communities, it's going to impact the nation, and you're impacting the nation for future generations in what you're doing. But what you're doing with Pay Love Forward, that's where the power and that's where the strength is. And you can see that in the Walk for Peace, in the people that are coming and out in droves and they're driving from distances to watch these Buddhist monks walk. Matt, that's what you're doing. You are doing that here in our community. And that's what's going to draw people in. The more people see goodness, the more they're going to understand the wicked and they're going to reject the wicked. The more they feel goodness, the better and the stronger they feel surrounded by that goodness and feeling empowered by that goodness and refreshed and feeling like they are just not so tired because the goodness has come in and they're now empowered and energetic. They're going to recognize the wicked that much faster. What you're doing is powerful, and it's what we need to just continue to expand on within our country. That doesn't mean we bow down. That doesn't mean we stop calling authoritarianism out. That doesn't mean we stop holding people accountable. It doesn't mean that at all. It means we continue to strengthen our voices, but we always remember how we're doing it, in the manner we're doing it, and what our ultimate goal is. Is our ultimate goal to improve our country, or is our ultimate goal to be right? We're already right. Is the ultimate goal that we have to stomp our fists and say, I want everyone to know I'm right? Is that the ultimate goal? Or is the ultimate goal that, no, I want a better country and a better world for your kids, my kids, and everything else, and how are we going to get there?
Amen. Well, and it's nobody's best kept secret that, Pay Love Forward just means WWJD.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not, that's not we're talking real Jesus Christ stuff. Yep. And that's the hard stuff. That's not easy. That's not, that's not performing arts center type stuff, where we go to church because we want to hear a 15-piece band and entertain me for 2 hours, an hour and a half, and I want to go get coffee afterwards. That's not what that is.
Penny, it's been an honor and a privilege.
Yeah, me too, Matt. Thank you so much. So glad to call you friend. So glad to know you and continuing to get to know you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for this honor to be with you today and for all that you're doing. I'm so thrilled and glad and proud, and I feel encouraged to know that you and your family are part of this community. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we can talk more about Gentry too, because he's a huge part of this as well, that we got to build a better world for him.
100%. And absolutely. And, there's so many different avenues we can go down. But Gentry is included in all of this. Both of your children, we're fighting for a good place to live for both of your children. And, you have, on one end, you have a daughter, a female whose rights are being taken away left, right, and center. And you have your extraordinary son, beautiful, extraordinary son, whose battle you've experienced firsthand, and is also his rights to live a dignified, healthy life is also being threatened.
Yes, it is.
And you and your wife have powerful voices, and all of those stories.
We intend to use them.
Absolutely. Matt, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Pay Love Forward podcast. Throughout this conversation, Penny and I kept returning to the question of who we are as a moral people. As Christ followers, that question is not abstract for us. It's not theoretical. It is the center of how we are called to live. I've been appalled by the complicity of much of the Christian community in supporting an administration and a political movement so utterly out of alignment with the life and teaching of Jesus Christ. Not because of party or ideology, but because of fruit, because of who is lifted up and who is discarded, because of whose stories are honored and whose are erased. So I want to end this episode with a passage that most clearly names who we are called to be as a moral people. Nowhere in the Bible is that calling more plainly and explicitly stated than what is often referred to as the judgment of nations. Matthew 25:31. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all of the holy angels with him, then shall he sit on the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world, for I was hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee hungered and fed thee, or thirsty and gave thee drink? When saw we a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, insomuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these brethren, ye have done it unto me. Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepare for the devil and his angels. For I was hungered, and ye gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me not in, naked, and ye clothed me not, sick and in prison, and ye visited me not. Then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee hungered, or athirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister unto thee? Then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, insomuch as ye did it not to one of the least of these, ye did it not unto me. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. One of the theologians who helped me understand the weight of that passage and what it calls us to do is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. In 1933, as the Nazi regime was tightening its grip, Bonhoeffer wrote, The church has an unconditional obligation to the victims of any ordering of society. Even if they do not belong to the Christian community, the church must question the state as to its legitimacy, as to its actions, and call the state to account. The church must not simply bandage the victims under the wheel, but jam a spoke in the wheel itself. That conviction is what sits behind Pay Love Forward. It is not an idea, and it is not a slogan. We're called to stand with the oppressed, the marginalized, and the stranger. Pay Love Forward is a movement built around an ethic. Find the rejected stone and build there. If this conversation moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't let it stop there. Pay Love Forward exists to build compassionate communities for the at-risk and underserved through mentorship, story, and presence. This podcast is one small way we live out that calling, by preserving voices, honoring dignity, and telling stories that refuse to flatten human beings into talking points. I'm grateful for the partnership with Resilient Stories, an organization dedicated to amplifying the voices of courage, recovery, and renewal across Montana. Together, we're committed to hearing the story within the story, the deeper narrative of resilience that connects us all. Thank you for listening. Let's keep building something beautiful together.